Deep beneath the shifting crescent of a dune where the wind speaks only in whispers of friction, and time itself dissolves into grains of ancient quartz, there rests a secret cold and silent thing not meant for the desert soon, a perfect circle of polished black basalt obsidian, reflecting nothing but the dust of forgotten stars. It lies cool beneath the punishing heat, a memory etched in stone belonging to a civilization swallowed whole by the sands, silence so profound it holds the echo of footsteps that walked this same endless path centuries ago, and we'll walk it tonight. Oh, I am Nasrullah, and this is History Love Bay. Travel not for speed, but for the profound, luxurious boredom of history. We seek the deep immersion, the slow sway, the hypnotic repetition of journeys that took months, not minutes, tonight. We begin a vast, slow undertaking, the longest road known to man, the ancient artery of trade, the Silk Road itself. We'll walk with the merchants, the quiet guards, the heavily laden Bactrian. Camels across sands that eat time and light and sound to join a caravan, leaving the furthest edge of civilization from a city known simply as the Jade Gate. We leave behind the comfort of stone walls, the scent of cedar smoke, the last safe. Well, we begin our crossing into the Gobi, into the Tarim Basin, into the endless Hushalal. Your mind to settle into the pace of the desert. Allow the dust to cloak your thoughts. We begin our slow departure now. Morning finds us huddled near the massive gate. Etched with the wear of 10,000 crossings, the sun has just cleared the eastern mountains, turning the sandstone walls a pale butter color, a color that promises to sharpen into brutal amber by midday. The air is still cool, but carries the sharp musk of wool and unwashed animal, the smell of damp earth mixing with dried dates, and the pungent bite of crude leather. Activity is not frantic. It is methodical practice, deeply slow. The loading has been underway since before the first hint of light. The great two-humped camels are kneeling massive islands of grumbling endurance. Their huge padded feet tucked beneath them, waiting for the burden day, are being secured with heavy wooden saddles and crisscrossing ropes. The ropes must be perfect. Taut and balanced, the entire journey hinges on the slow, perfect stability of the load. Are carrying bolts of finished silk, shimmering reds and blues, the primary treasure, but also heavy bags of medicinal roots, thick ropes of dried licorice spices. Wrapped in oiled paper cinnamon and star anise, pungent and precious, and the bulk of the load dried fruit heavy. Jars of sticky honey rolls of fine pale paper for scholars. Bundle is inspected, touched, weighed, checked by the master merchant old. Jahan wears thick cotton, heavily quilted protection against the coming sun. His face is lined deeply etched, like an ancient map. His eyes half closed, always calculating the weight, the water, the distance, the possibility of wind. The sound is a low, continuous rhythmic symphony. The soft thud of heavy sacking against the camel flanked the occasional wet gurgle of a camel expressing deep displeasure. Muffled, slow footsteps of the drivers in thick leather boots, the clinking of iron rings. On the harness, the low, steady chant of the loading songs, rhythm that settles the heart and quiets the anxious mind. Sun lifts higher, washing the courtyard in a uniform amber glow. The gate guard shifts his weight, stone face, slow moving. He waits for the final count and then the signal. Lead camel rises first, a massive, slow unfolding of muscle and bone. Quiet scraping sound as the rope holds true one. By one, the others follow their rising, a geological event. Rather than mere movement, they stand fully loaded, swaying slightly huge silhouettes against the brightening sky. Drivers take their places, their long poles ready to guide the massive animals. Jahan nods once a subtle signal invisible to the casual, and the caravan begins to move slowly, the pace is glacial, deliberate, soothing. The first steps out from the protection of the walls are soft, almost hesitant. The heavy hooves sink slightly into the deep silt outside the city boundary. The stone paving ceases, replaced by the fine powder of the desert floor. We are outside now. The enormous ancient stone gate recedes behind us, becoming smaller. It is the last structure we will see for many, many days, perhaps weeks. The sky is immense, utterly empty, save for the blinding sun now climbing steadily. We follow the ancient track already defined by 10,000 years of pressure depression in the sand that serves as our guide. A slight velvet trough worn into the plain. The desert unfolds around us, a vast panorama. A muted tone sand is not just yellow, it is pale rose at dawn, is bleached bone white at noon, is deep apricot near the horizon, but now everything is cast in a hard, brilliant gold. The air is already thinning, becoming drier, pulling the moisture. From the skin, the silence of the open desert is profound. It absorbs the sound of the caravan, muffling the creaks. The steps, the low vocalizations, the sound that dominates now is the rhythm, the relentless. Steady, slow pace, listen to the sway, the rhythmic. Side-to-side movement of the camelback, the weight shifting slowly, predictably. Creak of the saddlewood against the animal's coarse velvet hide. Soft thud of the animal's giant padded foot meeting the desert floor. Thud, pause, thud. Pause it is the heartbeat of the caravan, the clock that governs our lives. The drivers do not speak much, they save their breath. They walk beside their charges or perch high on the loads. They sing sometimes low, continuous drones, wordless melodies. That serve only to mark Time, sound like the hum of a distant, forgotten engine. We are moving at the speed of a resting mind, perhaps. 3 miles an hour, maybe slightly less. This speed allows for observation, not reaction. We watch the way the dust plumes. Up only slightly fine powder rising in slow motion, then settling instantly. A low fog of ochre always surrounding camels. Legs, the heat builds slowly, stealthily. It begins as a warmth on the back of the neck, then tightens around the temples. Jahan. And the guards cover their heads with thick turbans, pale linen wrapped many times, say. Pull the ends across their mouths to filter the constant dust. This is the ritual, the necessary. Obedience to the environment, we travel for hours with no change. In scenery, only the angle of the sun changes, slowly moving from high above to the slight western bias. Horizon remains endless, flat, shimmering faintly with heat mirage. Great white lake seems to appear miles ahead. Shimmering water reflecting. The sky, but Jahan knows it is just light playing tricks, the heat dancing in the air. The heat itself becomes a physical presence, a heavy cloak pressing down, stifling expectation. But the movement continues steady, unbroken. The long line of camels stretches. Out behind us, perhaps 30 strong, a quiet, segmented serpent traversing the empty wastes each. It is a small world, a small load of silk or spice or tea, each driver locked into the rhythm of his own animal. Sun reaches its zenith, the moment of maximum. Stillness and heat it is blinding white overhead, casting only short, harsh shadows. We do not stop. We cannot stop for long. The time lost is too valuable. The risk too great is taken. Perhaps only for the animals to drink a small ration of precious water, but the caravan is restless. The drivers know that momentum is key. Soon we are moving, the slight resistance broken. Afternoon walk begins, heavier, slower, more meditative. The sand has absorbed the sun's full force and radiates. The heat upwards making the air thick and wavy near the ground. Silk bales glow under this intense light, soft hues of crimson and emerald, softened by the layer of fine. Pale dust, the journey becomes less about geography and more about internal. Endurance, the mind slows down, matches the pace of the camel. You find yourself watching small things. Where a single strand of coarse camel hair catches the light, the slow shifting pattern of shadow. Beneath the animal's belly, the subtle rise and fall of the hump against the vast blue sky. Everything becomes simplified, reduced to sound and light and heat. The whisper of the wind against the thick wool felt of a driver's tunic. The steady thump of the wooden water vessel, secured by rope. The absolute silence between the footfalls. We are far away, now far, from the Jade Gate city. It is gone, vanished, dissolved into the haze behind us. There is only the present moment, the slow forward motion, the knowledge that tomorrow will bring the same sight, the same pace, the same heat. The promise of the Gobi Desert is the promise of endless space, a hushed canvas upon which we are but a small moving line. This is the beauty of this journey, the profound emptiness that encourages rest, the rhythmic sway, the absolute dedication to slowness. We continue now into the late afternoon, the sun beginning its slow descent towards the west. Light shifts softening from harsh white to a rich, warm gold. The shadows lengthen, stretching far out across the pale sand. Desert floor begins to feel the first subtle cooling. The long shadows make the undulations in the sand visible, creating a textured, velvet landscape. The air loses its stifling density, becoming nearly hot and dry. The camels seem to draw strength from the approaching evening. Their pace remains steady, but they hold their heads a little higher. We follow the track, we obey the sun, we submit to the silence, the only sound the movement, the slow, inevitable progression of the Silk Road caravan. The hushed journey continues towards the far horizon. A journey measured not in miles, but in heartbeats and soft footfalls. Sound of the loading chains is the first thing that moves in the dark hours, long before the sun even dares to rise a soft metallic sigh against the hushed velvet of the pre-dawn air. Welcome to Historylube. I am Nazrullah. And tonight we begin a journey that stretches not just across mountains and sand, but across the very slow measurement of time itself. Stand at the eastern gate ready to receive the sun's first whispered promise. Our story begins where the paved road ends, where the last familiar scent of baked clay city wall gives way to cold dry inhalation of the Gobi Desert, a journey of dust and distance, a caravan preparing for its slow procession westward. The air is thin sharp, a relentless reminder that the world outside the walls operates on different uncompromising rules. The night cold settles deep into the wool of the heavy coats worn by the cameliers, men cloaked in thick felt in silence, their faces etched deep by previous suns and unimaginable winds. The silence is broken only by the low rumble of the two-humped back-trained camels complaining mammals, their ancient necks stretching upwards. They protest the straps, the cinches, the increasing weight of the world's most desired goods. Listen closely to the scrape of the ropes against the coarse camel hair, sound that will become the rhythm of the next 3 months, a slow, repetitive friction that speaks of patience and heavy labor. The cargo is precious, incredibly so, bolts of silk packed tight in oilskin wrappers, impervious to the subtle moisture of the morning air, stacked upon cedar boxes filled with tea bricks, compressed hard as stone. The boxes themselves secured with iron bands that clink softly in the cold. Imagine the smell, the specific aroma of this departing wealth, a mix of dry desert dust, the fermented scent of dried dates for the journey, the slightly acidic tang of sheep's fat used to grease the wooden wheel hubs, and underneath it all the faint powdery smell of pure uncut silk. Lanterns flicker small amber pools of light held close to the ground, illuminating the feet of the men and the massive padded hooves of the camels. Each step a careful placement, a calculation of balance and burden. These camels are the ships of the sand, magnificent beasts capable of bearing 200 kilograms for 30 kilometers a day after slow day, their wide splayed feet distributing the weight across the fine shifting grains. They do not hurry, they only endure. The head merchant Master Lee stands near the main gate, a man of quiet authority, his hands folded into the sleeves of his heavy jade-colored robe, watching the final lashings. He carries not a map or a weapon, but a ledger, a small book of delicate paper detailing the worth of this walking wealth, its value measured in silver and risk. He does not rush his men. Haste is the enemy of the desert traveler. Haste leads to ill-secured loads, ill-cussed roots, or worst of all, missed watering holes. Slow is safe. Slow is certain. Slow is the law of the road. Single horn sounds not loud or commanding, but a deep breathy call meant only for the immediate company, a signal that the moment of departure has arrived. Sun has not cleared the horizon yet, but a soft pink light touches the highest peaks of the nearby mountains, turning them temporarily to rose-colored stone. The rest of the world remains submerged in indigo and shadow. The first line of camels rises with a great sigh, a shuddering heave of muscle and bone. They grumble, loudly protesting the sudden shift from kneeling rest to standing commitment, their sheer size blocking the remaining starlight. One by one, 20 beasts, 30 beasts, 40 slow creatures rise and turn their faces west, following the dark track already etched into the earth by countless journeys before them, a path worn deep into the heart of Asia. The procession begins. It is not a swift opening movement. It is a measured yielding to gravity and direction. The first steps are tentative, almost clumsy, as if the beasts must remember how to walk under the pressure of their loads. The sand is cold beneath the velvet pads of their feet. Walk slowly out of the city's immediate sphere of influence, past the last watchtower, past the small shrines dedicated to the goddess of the west. The air grows colder, thinner with every yard gained. The sounds of the city fade quickly, its markets, its clamor. Its smells are absorbed by the vastness, leaving only the simple, steady sound of the caravan itself, the creak of the leather, Straps, the steady, deep breathing of the animals, the soft shuffling of 100 hooves on dry sand. This sound, the movement itself, is the first hypnotic layer of the journey for. The first hour, the men do not speak much. Their attention is dedicated to vigilance, ensuring no load shifts, no knot loosens, no animal strays. They walk beside the heavy freight, their own shadows stretching out impossibly long, in the low morning light like slender cloaked guardians. The light is now amber, a deep golden wash spreading across the endless dunes, illuminating every wrinkle and curve of the landscape, turning the desert into a massive sculpted ocean of frozen waves. The air warms subtly, but the chill lingers close to the ground, forcing the men to pull their collars higher. They march at the pace of the camel, a pace that demands patience, a measured 4 kilometers per hour, hour upon hour. Imagine walking this pace for 12 hours under a silent, empty sky, the horizon constantly receding, never offering a discernible change in form, only in texture. The desert is a study in eternal sameness and minute variation. Dust begins to rise, a fine particulate cloud stirred by the passing caravan. It does not obscure the vision, but hangs suspended in the golden sunlight, a shimmering curtain that follows the group like a ghost of their movement. This dust enters everything. It settles into the folds of the clothing, into the dried rations, into the corners of the eyes. It is the constant companion, the invisible witness to the slow crossing around mid-morning. The sun has climbed high enough to exert its true power. The air thickens with heat, and the landscape shifts from cool amber to blinding white gold. The heavy woolen coats now feel suffocating, but they are necessary protection against the sun's merciless gaze. The men adjust their headcloths, wrapping them tightly to protect their necks and faces from the burn and the grit. The sweat begins to bead along the hairline, instantly drying into a fine white salt crust. The ground beneath the camel's feet is now warm, sometimes hot. The reflection of the sun off the pale sand is brutal, forcing the travelers to narrow their eyes and rely on the hypnotic rhythm of their stride master. Lee watches the color of the camel's coats. The dark brown hair absorbs the heat. Quickly he knows the midday rest is approaching, but they must reach a specific patch of sheltered rock before they stop for long. The soundscape simplifies further. Now, there's no wind, only the heavy silence. The only variation is the soft jingle of the tiny bells attached to the lead camel, a calming chime meant to maintain the steady pace, a soft metallic lullaby echoing over the dunes. The interstretch of gravel and broken stone. The pace slows slightly, the camels tread more carefully. The loose stone shifts and scrapes under the weight. The sound is like the grinding of ancient teeth, a geological lament. This is the beginning of the true desolation. The land here offers nothing, no shade, no water, no life. The caravan is an isolated island of movement and purpose, suspended in a sea of beige nothingness. The concentration required to maintain this pace for hours is immense. It is not physical exertion that breaks the men, but the mental weight of the monotony, the constant awareness that every drop of water, every morsel of food must be guarded and measured. The men begin to recite short poems or simple counting rhymes to themselves, softly under their breath, a low, repetitive murmur that keeps the mind tethered to the present task and prevents the vastness from swallowing their consciousness. The shadows begin to shrink, retreating almost entirely beneath the camels' massive bodies, indicating the zenith of the day and the peak of the heat. Finally, after 5 unrelenting hours of marching, a low rock formation appears on the horizon, offering a rare promise of shade and natural shelter. The order is given, not shouted, but passed down. The line in low tones, halt. The process of stopping is as slow and deliberate as the process of moving. The caravan slows, gradually coming to a heavy rest. The camels kneel with deep groans of relief. Their burdens remain fixed, but the relief of stopping. The forward push is palpable. This midday halt lasts for 3 measured hours, the hottest hours of the day. The men quickly unload the heavy packs that contain their limited cooking supplies. Small leather sacks of dried beans, dried mutton fat, and the crucial supply of TA. Small fire is started using dried camel dung, the only fuel available. The smoke is thin and sharp-scented. Master Lee supervises the portioning of water, a critical task. Each man receives a small cup of stale but life-giving liquid from the leather skins, the skins themselves warm from the morning sun. The Camels are given their rest. They chew slowly and patiently on the dried hay brought specifically for this journey, and their massive jaws moving in a slow rhythmic grind. The heat is oppressive, radiating off the pale stone of the ground, shimmering above. The sand-like transparent water, the men retreat into the slivers of shade provided by the rock formations or even the shadow cast by the resting camels during. This time, the world seems to stop completely. The only movement is the slow, circular flight of a high desert vulture, a dark speck against the blinding blue. A watchful patience that mirrors the desert itself. The men do not speak of home or the city. They speak only of the road ahead, the expected terrain, the location of the next deep well, the condition of the lead camel's knee. Conversation is practical, mundane, focused entirely on survival and logistics. This lack of poetic conversation is the true language of the long journey. One of the younger cameliers uses the time to inspect the leather. Bindings on a heavy load of white porcelain, secured tightly to the back of a particularly large animal. The porcelain is protected by layers of straw and waxcloth, but the slightest shift can lead to catastrophic loss. A single fracture can ruin a piece worth a year's wages. He tightens the knots, rechecking the tension. The leather is stiff-hot to the touch, the smell of his effort is the honest scent of sweat and dried earth. Masterly sits against a warm stone, his eyes closed, but his mind clearly working. He's calculating the water expenditure against the projected days to the next reliable oasis. The desert is a mathematics problem where the answer is life or death. The boredom of the midday sun is a heavy, thick thing. It requires a unique discipline. Not to fight it, but to surrender to the temporary stillness, to let the mind float in the heat like the shimmering air above the sand. It is during these quiet moments that the scale of the undertaking truly sinks in. They are a tiny, fragile line of living things crossing a hostile planet, moving towards a distant, uncertain exchange of culture and commerce. The sun begins its descent to slight, perceptible decline from its highest point. An order to prepare is whispered down the line. No rush, no urgency, just a slow, inevitable return to motion. The men drink their final small portions of water before they rise, stretching muscles that have grown stiff under the weight of the enforced rest. The camels stand up, another series of deep labored groans, followed by the soft metallic clinking of the secured chains, their internal clocks. Knowing that the slow labor must resume, afternoon march begins as the desert changes its color palette. The blinding white light softens to a pale straw yellow. The shadows begin to lengthen, dramatically painting dark purple washes across the lower slopes of the dunes. This is the preferred time for travel. The heat is retreating. The animals are momentarily refreshed, and the sense of endless exposure lessens as the day turns toward evening. Air becomes slightly crisper, promising the deep cold of the desert night. The pace is steady, reliable. The rhythmic shuffling of hooves, the soft jingle of the lead bell, the only sounds that matter. We cover kilometer after kilometer, moving ever deeper into the heart of the great sandy wilderness. The land changes from loose sand to hard-packed clay, etched deep with the patterns of dried riverbeds, ancient paths that only the most experienced guides can read. The sky overhead is immense, impossibly wide, an endless bowl of fading blue. The desert here is not empty. It is full of tiny movements of unseen life, small, quick shadows darting beneath the shrubs. Dry, thorny scrub that offers no sustenance but somehow clings fiercely to existence. The caravan is now spread out into a long winding line, perhaps 2 kilometers from head to tail, a slow moving serpentine of burden and dedication, each man responsible for his specific of the line. The monotony begins to assert its full authority. The mind of the traveler drifts. It focuses on the back of the camel in front of it, on the way the leather strap curls slightly when the animal breathes, on the repetitive motion of the dust settling and rising. And this is the true test of the Silk Road journey, the ability to maintain focus and purpose through the deliberate absence of stimulus, the acceptance of the fact that the next visual change might be days away. The sun dips lower to the horizon. The color shift is sudden and profound. The entire western sky catches fire painting. The clouds in streaks of blood orange and deep molten amber. The heat dissipates quickly, the temperature dropping almost instantly. As the sun's influence fades, the men pull their collars tighter, anticipating the biting cold of the coming night. The Setting sun casts long dramatic shadows of the camels, shadows that seem to stretch and dance across the curved earth, moving like fleeting mythical creatures far larger than the animals that cast them. Master Lee scans the horizon looking for the designated stopping point, a small dry depression known to offer some minimal shelter from the wind that will certainly rise once the dark falls. The camels appear silhouetted against the last light, their massive forms etched black against the brilliant sky, an ancient line of commerce moving through an even more ancient landscape. The final steps of the day are taken under a sky that is rapidly turning from deep blue to inky black. The first few bright stars begin to prick the darkness impossibly. Clear and possibly distant, the walking ceases at a signal from Master Lee. A quiet wave of the hand at the entrance to the slight depression. They have reached the day's required distance, a victory measured in dryness and exhaustion. The process of settling for the night begins immediately, the speed driven by the descending cold. The camels are made to kneel in a tight protective circle, their bodies providing a windbreak. The loads are not fully removed, only adjusted and covered with heavy felt to protect against the dew and the cold small. Fires are built carefully, contained not for warmth, but for the necessary boiling of water for tea and the slow simmering of the dried rations. The meager evening meal is eaten quickly, silently. Sky above is now a breathtaking blackness, revealing a multitude of stars unseen from any city, a celestial velvet cloak spread above the desert floor. Men drink their hot wheat tea, the simple warmth, a profound comfort after the long hours of exposure. They speak in low murmurs, checking the health of the animals, the security of the loadsmaster. Lee sits slightly apart, reviewing his small ledger under the light of a hooded lantern, ensuring that the day's slow progress matches the necessary timetable for reaching the next great oasis. The sentries are posted, the men wrapping themselves in layers of wool and camel hair, settling down on the cold sand for a few hours of uneasy rest. The first night on the road is always the hardest. Body adjusting to the hard ground, the mind adjusting to the proximity of the silence and the scale of the world outside the city walls. Silence here is profound, not the absence of sound, but a heavy pressure sound unto itself, the sound of deep space and endless time, only broken by the soft crunch of the camels chewing cud, a steady, rhythmic, soothing sound. Journey has only just begun, the first slow, deliberate step into the immensity. The ancient, silent world of the Silk Road waits for their slow, steady advance, and we too must now wait for the morning light to return and command the next slow day of movement. Feel the quiet darkness stretching across the world, a silence deep and complete beyond the reach of day. Welcome, traveler. I am Nazrullah, and I am honored to share this hushed moment with you tonight. We begin a journey not of speed, but of slow, careful steps into the past, into the quiet corner of history, where dust settles soft as velvet. Welcome to Histralube, where we whisper the stories that time almost forgot settle. Now let your mind drift like smoke. Above a low fire, let the worry slip from your shoulders, like a cloak falling to the floor. Story begins in the far-reaching shadows of the fourth hour before dawn, in a place known only as the Folded Valley. A place where the air smells perpetually of wet stone and ancient cedar wood. There lived a man named Elias. He was not a king, nor a warrior, nor a famous poet, but a keeper of quiet things. A curator of the unseen archive. Elias lived within a structure he simply called the Annex, a small building appended to a much larger ruin. The Annex was built of rough-cut limestone and roofed with heavy slate tiles that absorbed the sound of the falling rain, leaving the interior in a perpetual state of hushed stillness inside. The Annex, everything was ordered with precise dedication. Shelves made of dark mahogany held scrolls bound in leather dyed the deep color of dried amber. On a small work table lit by a single steady oil lamp rested the subject of Elias's current slow preoccupation. It was a map, not a map of roads or cities, but a map of silence, a chart of forgotten pathways etched onto skin-thin parchment. The ink used was black iron gall, stiffening the lines where the old cartographer had pressed to. Hardier centuries ago, Elias traced the lines with the tip of his finger, a movement so slow it barely disturbed the dust that lay soft as velvet across the table. Surface, he was preparing to leave. He had been preparing for 10 years for this single night. Legend etched near the corner of the map. spoke of the Whispering Vault, a place whispered about only in the most secluded monasteries and hinted at in the cold stone crypts of fallen empires. It was said the vault held not treasure of gold, but the original words, the root source, of knowledge that had been scattered like seeds to the wind during the great silence, ill risk of searching. For roots, the forest outside his window was dense and old. The trees so tall they permanently cloaked the valley floor in twilight. He dressed slowly. He wore thick wool tunics and a heavy traveler's cloak woven from sheep's wool naturally colored. The gray of winter dawn, he pulled on boots, stiff leather oiled many times until they were soft and silent on the floor. Tucked the map carefully into a watertight cylinder of polished copper, then slipped the cylinder into an inner pocket zone. Deep within the lining of his cloak, he extinguished the lamp, not with a breath or a puff of air, but by turning the wick slowly down until the flame shrank to a minuscule blue point, then vanished, leaving only the metallic scent of extinguished oil. The darkness was absolute, but Elias did not need light. He knew every stone, every beam, every creak of the annex. He stepped outside into the cold air. Cold was sharp but clean. It carried the scent of pine needle and damp earth. The only sound was the far-off rush of the river. A deep rhythmic sigh against the stones of the valley. Elias began his walk toward the forest edge. Movement was a meditation, a slow, deliberate placement off-weight and footfall, ensuring no unnecessary sound disturbed the vast quiet. He walked toward a break in the ancient wall that defined the outer perimeter of the ruins. Of the wall was built of immense basalt blocks fitted perfectly without mortar, each stone weighing more than a dozen men could lift. They were etched with symbols, long undecipherable glyphs that spoke of celestial movements and forgotten gods. Elias slipped through the narrow gap where two stones had shifted slightly centuries ago, a passage that only a keeper would know. Now he was fully within the forest, the trees pressing close on every side. Path was not easy. It was overgrown with ferns and moss that grew soft as velvet across the fallen timber. He moved deeper, following the faint silver light cast by the moon, which only occasionally managed to pierce the heavy canopy above. He thought of the knowledge that awaited him. Was seeking the chronicles of the first city, the one place history claimed was pure, untainted by the later corruptions of power and ambition. He walked for what felt like several hours, the slow effort, a balm to his usually restless scholarly mind. He crossed a narrow stone bridge, slick with condensation. Below him, the water rushed dark and cold, a low, constant white noise that filled the spaces between the trees. The map was redundant now. He was walking a path only known to the bones of the land itself. He recognized the curve of an ancient standing stone, carved with the likeness of a watchful owl. He recognized the triple-rooted oak tree whose roots gripped the cliff face like the knuckles of a giant hand. He knew he was close when the air began to shift. It was not colder, but drier. The damp, earthy smell was replaced by the dry, sharp smell of old marble. And confinement, he reached the base of a low hill where the forest abruptly ended. In front of him rose a structure entirely unexpected. It was not a ruin of crumbling brick or shattered columns. It was a perfectly preserved facade of white marble stone. Standing against the backdrop of the dark trees, it looked too clean, too perfect for this forgotten place. The marble was polished smooth, reflecting the weak moonlight like hushed mirrors. At the center of the facade was the entrance. It was a massive door fashioned entirely of dark bronze, weathered green by time. The door was unmarked, but for a single symbol etched deep into the metal. It was the sign of the silent He3, interlocking circles that represented knowledge, permanence, and rest. Elias stopped 20 feet from the door and stood motionless. He waited not for courage, but for the building itself to acknowledge his presence. Silence here was different from the silence of the forest. The silence was deliberate. It felt heavy and pressurized, as if holding in a massive breath. He stepped forward, now slow step after slow step, until he stood directly before the bronze. He reached out his hand and placed his palm against the cold metal. It was shockingly cold, radiating the accumulated chill of century. Elias was not seeking entry by force. He had been entrusted with the means of passage. He withdrew a small object from his deep pocket. It was a piece of amber, the size of a pigeon. egg polish smooth over generations within the ember. Was suspended a minute feather trapped perfectly in the golden resonness. Was the key, the one token that would satisfy the ancient warding. He found a slight indentation within the stone frame beside the bronze door. Was barely visible, but perfectly sized to cradle the amber piece. He placed the amber into the hollow. It settled with a small, barely audible click. For a moment, nothing happened then. A low humming sound began to resonate from the depth of the marble walls. It was not a scary sound, but a deep resonating tone like a gigantic tuning fork struck in slow motion. The symbol on the bronze door, the 3 interlocking circles, began to glow not with flame or electricity, but with a soft inner luminescence, the color of cool starlight. The light flowed from the symbol down into the door and into the marble frame. Elias stepped back, waiting. The ground vibrated slightly beneath his heavy boots. Then, with a slow, reluctant groan, the immense bronze door began to draw inward. It did not swing. On hinges, it slid into the thickness of the marble wall, a feat of ancient engineering that defied the laws of weight and friction. As the door recessed, it revealed an interior of absolute darkness. The air that rushed out was stale and deep-smelling, of dust and dried paper, and Tiny Elias took a slow breath, steadying himself. He retrieved the amber key, which was now warm to the touch. He stepped across the threshold into the whispering vault. The door immediately began to slide shut behind him, closed with the same slow, inexorable power, and the final click of the metal meeting the stone was the sound of separation, the sound of the past. Closing the present out, he was entombed in perfect darkness. He brought out a small, simple lamp, not the oil lamp from his study, but a metal lamp designed to burn a low, slow fuel that produced little smoke. He lit the wick with a sparker. The soft light pushed back the darkness, revealing the immediate interior. He stood in a narrow entrance corridor built of the same flawless white marble. The ceiling was high, the floor incredibly smooth, worn down perhaps by the passage of unseen currents of air over millennia. The passage led forward into a wide arched opening. Elias advanced carefully, his lamp casting slow-moving shadows that danced ahead of him. He passed through the arch and entered the main chamber. It was vast. It was a silent library. The light of his small lamp could not reach the high arched ceiling, but it illuminated the immediate walls. Walls were not adorned with murals or carvings. They were lined entirely from floor to ceiling with cubbies and niches each holding a scroll or a thick-bound volume. The sight was overwhelming in its dedication. The scrolls were pale, many of them fragile, almost white with age. The books were bound in every shade of muted brown and gray, their spines thick with the undisturbed dust of ages. Elias walked slowly down the central aisle, his lamp held high. He was looking for the heart of the vault, the place described by the map's cryptic notes. He walked past hundreds, perhaps thousands of chronicles, of laws of poetry, of sciences lost to the world outside. Saw books made of pressed cedar sheets and scrolls made of hammered gold foil. The silence in the room was almost audible, a ringing in the ears caused by the sheer absence of sound. He reached the end of the immense hall. There was a final wall, not lined with books, but built of a single block of dark, unpolished granite, ancient stone. This stone was cold and forbidding, standing in stark contrast to the brilliant white marble of the rest of the room. Etched deeply into the center of the granite was a single shallow circular depression. It was small, perhaps the size of a man's fist. Elias knew this was the destination. This was the place where the first city's records were meant to rest. He reached into his cloak and pulled out the copper cylinder that held the map. He carefully opened it, the thin parchment. Rustling dryly, he unrolled the map, revealing the central symbol, a spiral drawn in blood-red ink beneath. The spiral was the instruction, "Here rests the weight of the sun." Elias did not understand the instruction. He held the map close to the lamp light, examining the depression. In the granite, the depression was smooth and seemed recently cleaned of dust, unlike the rest of the stone. Slowly reached out his finger and traced the circle as his fingertip touched the cold granite. The stone began to humming. Was same deep resonance he had heard when the door opened, but now it was localized, focused right here in the granite. Block. The small depression began to change. It did not glow, but it seemed to absorb the light of his lamp, becoming a well of perfect Darkness, then slowly imperceptibly a form began to rise from the hollow. It was not a book or a scroll. It was a cylinder formed of clear dents. Crystal polished to mirror smoothness, it was resting on its end, perfectly centered in the granite hollow inside. The crystal Elias could see something suspended. It was a fine silvery sand constantly shifting, flowing in slow motion within the crystal confines. As the crystal cylinder rose fully into view, the humming intensified. It was a tone so deep it felt. More in the chest than Elias stood transfixed by the lightless object. He knew this was the weight the records transformed into an enduring form. He knew he must touch it to receive the knowledge. He reached out his hand towards the crystal. Light of his lamp flickered once, twice, as if struggling against the power emanating from the stone. He brought his fingers close to the crystal surface, saw faint blue lines forming just beneath the surface of the granite, moving like liquid lightning. Toward the crystal cylinder, his fingers brushed the cold, smooth glass. The instant he made contact, the sound stopped. The deep humming vanished, leaving the silence of the library heavier than before. Crystal did not shatter or move, but the sand inside. The crystal suddenly ceased its slow motion, drifted, froze solid, and then a single word, a single thought appeared, not in Elias's ears, but directly in his mind, a word he did not understand. Yet understood completely. Waiting, Elias felt a profound chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the air. The crystal before him began to emanate a very slow pulse of light. It was not amber or white or blue. It was the color of forgotten things, the deep, cool shade of moon silver in the depths of the granite block where the crystal rested. Elias noticed a second small inscription, etched so fine it was almost invisible. It was a number and a location of coordinates for a place that did not exist on any current map of the world. He leaned closer, his mind struggling to process the cryptic cold knowledge that pulsed from the crystal. The silver light pulsed slowly, hypnotically, and from the depth of the stone just beneath the crystal cylinder, Elias heard a sound. It was not a structural sound, not a creak or a rustle. It was the faint, soft, undeniable sound of water dripping far, far below. The stone floor drip and then silence drip, a mystery waiting beneath the surface of the deep earth. Beneath the weight of the sun, a quiet truth resting until the slow, cold light reveals the path to the silent city hidden below we leave. Elias now standing in the hushed light of the silver crystal, listening to the water dripping in the deep cold. Darkness below the ancient stone, and we let the slow rhythm of the ancient library carry you gently into sleep until the next quiet dawn. The weight of the morning settled cold and clean upon the dust. The hours before the sun fully asserted its authority were the most precious, the most efficient. The air held the memory of night's deep chill, a hushed velvet sensation against the skin. But the eastern sky already promised heat, relentless, inescapable heat. The massive caravan began its slow, deliberate unfolding. It was not a race, this journey was a sustained surrender to distance and tima. Study in the physics of slow movement. Each camel, each driver, each roll of silk, each sack of spice understood the contract. The pace was set by the slowest beast, the oldest man, the heaviest low-day speed, calculated to conserve energy, maximize water reserves, and arrive intact months from now. The soft pad of the two-humped Bactrian camels was the primary sound, a dull, thudding, rhythmic, almost non-existent, against the fine ochre sandies. Noble ships of the desert moved with a steady, swaying gait there. Internal rhythm perfectly matched to the immense scale of the desert, their thick winter coats still shedding in patches, forming clumps of dull brown wool scattered along the ancient trail. We tracked the central line of the procession, main body of the caravan, the most valuable assets, contained within a protective spine of guards and experienced handlers. The leader, a man named Kalen, walked, not rode. He claimed the feel of the ground, the subtle shift of the dunes spoke to him through the soles of his worn leather boots. He was etched by the sun lines deep around his eyes, radiating outwards like the spokes of a collapsed wheel. He carried a light staff tipped with a piece of polished jade, not for defense, merely a counterweight. A balance point as movement was hypnotic, a slow, deliberate swing of the shoulders, a momentary lifting of the dust with the toe, then the heavy placement of the heel step after step after step. The sun began its ascent proper A brilliant sphere of liquid amber pouring over the eastern ridge. The shadows, which had been long and impossibly stretched, now began to shrink, retracting into the feet of the camels. Sand changed color minute by minute from a cool pale gray to a blinding, searing gold. The heat arrives in waves. First a dry whisper around the ankles. Then a tightening around the chest. By the third hour after dawn, the desert had fully woken. The air was thick, still, and utterly dry. Every breath felt like inhaling finely milled dust, heated slightly by an unseen furnace. Listen closely to the cargo, the most important of this entire moving city, the reason for the months of hardship, the reason for the guarded watch at night, the silk rolls, hundreds of them wrapped carefully, sometimes 5, sometimes 6 layers, deep in thick cotton and waxed canvas. They hang high on the camel packs, balanced expertly on either side of the massive humps they represent. Wealth, distance, and sheer labor. If you listen closely when the camel shifts its weight, you hear a faint rustle, sound like dry leaves moving indoors. That is the sound of pure woven light, the sound of future dynastic wealth moving westward beneath. The silk, sometimes placed low to avoid temperature extremes, are the spices sealed in massive pottery jars, sometimes coated in pitch clove cinnamon. Star anise, black pepper, the essential flavors of the East. These jars clink faintly against each other. Dull, soft, persistent percussion, muffled by the protective sacking. The air does not carry the scent yet, the jars must remain sealed. But the expectation of the scent, the imagined warmth of cinnamon, lingers in the memory of the men. And further back, the bulkier goods, heavy blocks of Himalayan salt, used both for trade and for the caravan's own sustenance. Of hardened tea, compressed into bricks wrapped tight in coarse jute. These packs require stronger ropes, heavier knots. They demand more. From the camels, they create a deeper groan when the animals shift, the constant low-level mechanical sound of heavy load bearing this. Road is ancient, is not merely a path worn by feet, is a history etched onto the landscape. For 2 millennia this same valley, this same cut in the stone has borne this weight. The stone that protrudes in jagged shards from the less traveled shoulders of the trail has seen countless faces, countless caravans, is a silent witness cloaked perpetually in dust. The routine dominates the monotony as the tool of survival. There's no excitement here, no sudden turns, no unexpected vistas. The horizon is always the same undulating line of pale sand, blending seamlessly into the pale blue sky. The goal is to eliminate. Surprised to embrace the predictable rhythm of movement and rest, the driver-handlers walk beside their allocated beast. They do not talk much. Conversation is a waste of saliva, a luxury that cannot be afforded under this relentless sun. They use small, sound soft clicks of the tongue, low guttural hums to communicate with the camels. The camels understand. They respond to the rhythm of their handler's voice, the consistency of a command-aid relationship, built on mutual necessity and years of shared suffering. The shadows now are almost gone. The sun directly overhead is a punishing white disk. It compresses the world, that flattens the details. The air shimmers above the ground, a visual distortion that plays tricks on the eye. Is that an oasis far ahead? That a ruined watchtower? No, it is the heat reflecting light. The desert playing its oldest trick. Alan stops for a momentary signal. He raises his hand. A hush immediately falls over the central line. The camels, sensing the halt, settle their weight with a deep sigh. The ropes that hold the packs creak, then settle taut. Midday rest not. A full stop, but a momentary pause to check the packs, to redistribute the weight, to offer the beasts a small measured ration of water is dispensed from heavy leather. Pouches stored deep within the cargo where the temperature remains slightly lower. It is warm water, almost tepid, but it is life. Each man receives a mouthful, a strictly controlled quantity. You feel the liquid slide down the throat, an immediate relief. Then, the instant return of the dryness, the sense that the desert immediately seeks to reclaim every drop. The handlers check the saddle sores, the cinch ropes. They examine the protective cloth around the camel's knees and ankles, a single injury chafing. Rope that breaks the skin can cripple an animal, delay the entire caravan, doom the mission. Attention to detail is not a virtue here, it is a prerequisite. Dust that constantly swirls around the lower legs, it is not ordinary dirt, it is fine powder. Ground down by millennia of traffic, it smells mineral and dry. When a breeze finally stirs and lifts it, It coats the inside of the nose, the back of the throat. It turns the sweat on the brow into a muddy paste. It is the smell of the Silk Road itself now. Is the hardest time of the day, the hours immediately following the brief pause. The muscles stiffen, the heat maximizes its intensity. The mind begins to wander. The journey dissolves into a series of identical steps. Identical heat cycles. The traveler must learn to detach the mind from the physical exertion to become an observer of their own slow progress. The small jade-tipped staff taps once against the ground. The silent signal travels down the line. The first camel raises its head. Others follow. The caravan returns to its steady, deliberate drift. Hours melt away. There's no concept of a quick pace. The land dictates the speed it demands. Respect and extreme slowness. To rush is to falter. To panic is to die. Patience is the currency of the desert traveler. We move through of land marked by ancient ruins, hardly ruins perhaps, more like suggestions of previous structures. Low crumbling wall of sun-baked mud brick, the faint outline of a square, well long since dry. These were former rest stops, former forts, former staging posts. They stand as stone warnings, proof that even the most robust human structures are temporary against the desert's persistence. Cole points his staff subtly toward a mound of smooth stones. Cairnet is not marked on the most detailed maps. It is a marker left by a previous generation of travelers, a silent language of survival. It confirms the route is correct. The path is holding true. The caravan moves parallel to a low range of hills. They're dark, rust-colored mountains of stone barren, completely devoid of vegetation. They hold the heat, radiating it back onto the travelers and the beasts. The air near these mountains is visibly hotter. The drivers pull the protective cloth higher across their faces, cloaking their features against the fierce reflections. The afternoon is an endless repetition of shades of ochre and burnt orange. The only variation is the slow, steady shortening of shadows as the sun begins its slow, reluctant descent toward the western rim. The light changes subtly from harsh white to a warmer golden hue. World becomes slightly sharper, slightly more defined as the ambient glare diminishes. Silence of the desert is absolute when the animals fall. Silent it is a deep, comprehensive stillness only broken by the soft sounds of the moving column, the rustle of protective wraps, the squeak of the ropes under tension. The very occasional cough from a cloaked handler whose throat is dry. Consider the sheer scale of the desert beneath us, millions of years of geological time compressed into these fine grains. Our crossing oceans of sand, not mere land, and the weight of the cargo we carry is the accumulated ambition of empires. The silk for the Roman elite, the spices for the kitchens of the Mediterranean, the jade for the nobles of Persia. The journey itself transforms the value of the goods, distance, scarcity, risk. These are the true costs of the Silk Road, not the price paid at the originating market. The camels begin to show signs of the long march. They lower their heads slightly. Their pace perhaps one fraction slower, but they are bred for this endurance. Their internal reservoirs are vast. They are not merely transport. They are partners in this hypnotic journey. They are the living engine of history moving across the stone. As the sun dips lower, the air cools almost instantaneously. A welcome change. The desert exhales. The long shadows return, stretching out. Behind the caravan, like fingers reaching toward the east, there are velvet shadows, soft and blue, contrasting sharply with the amber light catching the sand. Peaks Galen signals the end of the day's march. He finds the location sheltered slightly by a low rejay place where the wind, if it rises, will pass over them, not through them. The halting process is slow and methodical. Camels must be encouraged to kneel. The weight must be carefully taken off their backs. Ropes are unbound. The great silk rolls are lifted down, laid carefully upon protective mats. The jars of spice secured in a tight circle. The work of setting camp is the work of repetition. The same tasks performed identically every night for months. There is comfort in this ritual predictability. In the unpredictable waste of the desert, small fires are lit small. Low burning fires using dried animal dung and sparse brush collected during the march. The smell of smoke, thin and sharp, cuts through the dry evening air. Is the smell of security. The sound of water boiling for tea. The gentle low murmur of voices finally permitted to speak at length. The Long days finished the caravan rest. The ancient stars began to emerge one by one in the vast black bowl of the desert sky, ready for the hushed deep sleep of the desert floor and the relentless march of tomorrow. The vastness began just as it had ended. The hushed moment before sunrise broke the deep obsidian sky. They lay wrapped still in wool and felt the chill penetrating the stone of the small shelter they had found, or maybe just the lee side of a great dune, a temporary shield against the wind that perpetually chased them westward. The cold was not the fierce, biting cold of winter mountains, but a dry, penetrating chill that sucked the moisture from the very air, leaving throats parched before the day even began. A faint amber light touched the highest peaks of the dunes, those mountains of shifting sand that held secrets, buried beneath millennia of slow, relentless drift. Call came low and guttural from the chief camel handler, a sound that meant movement, preparation, the inevitable continuation. Camels groaned, a deep, resonant complaint that seemed to vibrate in the ground itself, protesting the burdens they had borne for weeks and the burdens they were about to assume. These animals were the true measure of the journey. Their patience, their incredible endurance, the very mechanism by which the world's woof moved, they were loaded with meticulous care. The bales of silk, the precious ceramic ware, the bolts of fine wool dyed with colors unseen in the West, all strapped tight against the wooden saddles. Load was balanced to the ounce, learned over generations of slow practice as slightly unbalanced. Load could chafe, could injure the camel, could delay the entire caravan for days. Dust rose immediately fine. Talcum powder of desert earth, the moment the first hoof lifted it, settled everywhere, clinging to the velvet texture of the cloak, staining the hands coating the dried rations. The air grew thick with the smell of dry earth camel, hair sweat, and the faint sweet scent of the herbs packed among the tea bricks. Slowly the file formed the long, segmented body of the caravan, stretching out like a great serpent waking in the early light. Perhaps 40 camels in this train, led by 2 sure-footed desert ponies, carrying the guards and the chief merchant. Nasrullah rode slightly ahead, his eyes already fixed on the horizon. A vast, unending expanse etched deeply into his ancient mind. He did not look back. He did not pause. He knew that dwelling on the miles already covered, or the miles yet to come, was the path to madness or despair. The only reality was the next footfall, the next hour, the next slow, steady progress. Sun cleared the rim of the earth, and the amber light intensified, becoming harsh white gold. Almost instantly, the transformation from cool pre-dawn to searing heat was frighteningly swift in this land. Shadows shrank rapidly, pulling themselves close to the feet of the travelers, offering no solace, no prolonged relief. They marched now into the heat. The sounds were minimal yet constant, a specific symphony of the Silk Road. The soft thudding of camel hooves muffled by the sand, the gentle rasp of the hemp ropes rubbing against the wooden frames, the creak of leather saddles, the low rhythmic humming of the camel drivers, a monotonous tune designed to soothe the animals and keep the men focused. The whisper of the wind, a constant dry companion. Hours bled into each other, indistinguishable, save for the desert was not empty. It was full of subtle variation, yet utterly monotonous. Sometimes they passed through tracks of hard sun-baked clay, cracked and fissured like ancient pottery. Sometimes the sand rose around them in smooth, sculpted dunes, offering immense effort for the animals to traverse. Sometimes they found meager, scrubbed, tough, thorny bushes that smelled faintly of sage, providing a temporary moment of green defiance against the arid landscape. Nasrullah watched the lead driver, a man named Kian, who had traveled this route since he was a boy. Kian knew the desert as one knows the lines of one's own. And he knew the false promises of the shimmering heat haze, the mirages that often danced on the horizon, offering cool blue water or distant walled cities, only to dissolve. Upon approach, Kian navigated not by map or compass, but by the shape of the far-off stone mountains, the subtle variations in the prevailing wind direction, and the disposition of the stars at night. He was attuned to the land in a primal way, and the caravan's safety rested entirely on his slow, measured wisdom. The focus remained always on water. They carried enough water to last 3 days, if rations severely stored and heavy. Leather skins bound tightly, and covered with damp cloths to encourage slow cooling through evaporation. The weight of the water was immense. A significant portion of the total load, yet without it, they were nothing, merely dried bones waiting for the wind to claim them. Every hour the watermaster assessed the supply, his face impassive, revealing nothing of the true state of their reserves. A camel drank deeply. If a skin sprung a leak, if they missed a planned water hole, the entire structure of the journey was threatened. The silence of the march during the hottest of the day was profound. The sun stood high overhead, a relentless searing eye that bleached the world of color, leaving everything in shades of pale yellow and burnt ochre. The men walked mostly heads bowed, protecting their faces with turbans wrapped tightly around the lower half of their faces, leaving only the eyes visible, protected by narrow slits of cloth. The dust settled in the folds of their clothing, creating fine layers that shifted with every slow movement. The air itself felt heavy, thick, almost resistant to breath, a dry heat that pulled the moisture from the lungs with every exhalation. They were cloaked figures moving through an ancient landscape, unchanged for 10,000 years. The cargo was their obsession, their burden, and their protection. Imagine the silk, thousands of yards of it tightly woven, shining even through its protective wrappings. It was not merely fabric, it was currency, liquid wealth that funded empires and defined status. From Constantinople to Chang'an, each bale represented months of painstaking labor. The worms fed cocoons, harvested the threads, spun the fabric, dyed with rare pigments derived from minerals or insects. Nasrullah carried 3 exceptional bales dyed with Tyrian purple, so dark it seemed almost black, a color reserved only for the highest imperial courts. To carry such wealth through such harsh, desolate terrain was an act of audacious commerce, an act of faith in the enduring desire of humanity for beauty and luxury. Next to the silk were the spices, cinnamon, star, anise, peppercorns, all sealed in thick wax jars there. Scent was subdued now under the relentless sun, but at the evening halt, when the jars were briefly opened, the explosive aroma would fill the camp. A brief reminder of lush, fertile worlds they had left behind. The value of pepper in Rome could exceed its weight in gold. This dusty, slow journey was the engine driving the global economy of the first millennium. A patient, steady exchange of desires. The slow, rhythmic swing of the camel's gait became mesmerizing. The camel walks with both legs on one side, moving forward simultaneously, creating a rocking motion that quickly lulls the rider or walker into a state of semi-awareness. 2, 3, 4. The rocking steady. Rocking 1, 2, 3, 4. The dust rising 1, 2, 3, 4. The sun moving. This rhythm became the mind's metronome, beating out the long, measured passage of time. There was little talk, small communications were managed with gestures or low whispers, always about the immediate necessities. The adjustment of a strap, the need for a short rest, the sighting of a distant ridge. Conversation was an unnecessary expenditure of moisture and energy. A midday rest was brief, agonizingly brief. They did not unpack the major loads, they simply stopped. The camels forced them to kneel and quickly built small, low shelters using thick woven mats stretched over low poles, offering a sliver of shade. The men drank sparingly, ate hard, dry biscuits or sundry dates, and then slept shallowly immediately, conserving every bit of energy for the afternoon march. Heat hammered down on the canvas and the sand radiating upward, making the air tremble. Sleep was not restful. It was merely the necessary cessation of movement, a surrender to the inevitable heat. Nasrullah never truly slept. He rested his body, but his mind remained alert, watching the horizon, calculating the speed of the wind, listening for any change in the disposition of his animals. The greatest danger was not bandits today. They were too far into the deep desert where only desperation or madness resided. The greatest danger was the environment itself, the slow, relentless attrition of thirst, heat, or the sudden, terrifying sandstorm. The sandstorm was the desert's fury the moment the gentle dust became a suffocating, blinding wall. If caught unprepared, they could lose the track, lose their way. Or, worse, the storm could cover a kneeling camel, burying it alive in minutes. They relied on Qian to sense the change, the sudden drop in temperature, the ominous stillness of the air before the wind exploded. This day, however, was merely hot, merely slow, merely long. The afternoon march began with the sun already sinking slightly, but offering no reduction. In its intensity, the shadows lengthened imperceptibly, pulling themselves slowly back out from under the camels. Long, thin shadows stretched across the dunes, giving the landscape a new dimension. A sudden sense of depth and scale that had been absent during the featureless midday glare. Now they saw the true architecture of the desert, the slow-carved valleys, the wind-sculpted ridges. The strange rock formations that rose like forgotten ancient monuments. The pace remained exactly the same. Never accelerating, never slowing down, a constant 3 kilometers per hour, hour after hour, across the face of the earth. The men felt the dull ache in their legs, the stiffness in their backs, the pervasive dry weariness that settled deep into the bones. This was the endurance, the realization that the journey was not a feat of speed or strength, but a sheer act of unrelenting patience. They focused on the velvet texture of the twilight air slowly settling around them. The sky began its transition. From blinding white to the beautiful deep shades of bruised lilac and rose pink that only the desert evening provides. The heat finally began to lift, shedding its grip on the dry land. With the cooling air came a surge of efficiency. The camels lifted, their pace slightly perhaps, sensing the impending rest, the promise of fodder. Men adjusted their cloaks, pulling the thicker layers around them, preparing for the rapid drop in temperature. They reached the chosen halting spot just as the last sliver of the sun disappeared, leaving a streak of angry orange on the western edge. The site was a small natural depression protected on 3 sides by low dunes, an excellent spot to shield them from the prevailing night wind activity. Immediately exploded in a controlled flurry of motion. The camels were immediately unloaded, the ropes, untied the heavy bales, carefully set down on mats to protect them from the cold. Some animals were led to their feed troughs, simple stretched hides, where they received their measured ration of dried alfalfa and a small amount of barley. This feeding was essential and non-negotiable. Of the routine, their legs were checked, their humps, muscles, exanals examined for any sign of wear or chafing. The health of the caravan was the health of the camels, while the handlers tended the animals. The cook and his assistants quickly gathered the scarce scrub brush and dried dung to start the fire. Desert fire was small, cautious, never roaring like a forest fire, but offering a steady, gentle heat and a focal point for the camp. The smoke smelled of dry earth and animal waste, a comforting, familiar smell of civilization asserting itself against the wilderness. Merchant guards immediately set the watch. 2 men posted on the highest dunes, their eyes searching the gloaming. Even in the deep, desert vigilance was necessary. A distant flicker of light, a strange sound carried far in the hushed air could signal trouble. Nasrullah sat near the fire unwrapping a simple meal of boiled wheat porridge mixed with a small amount of preserved meat. Ate slowly, thoughtfully, his eyes catching the light of the small flames. Tonight he called Kian and the water master to him. The conversation was low, concise, focused. Entirely on logistics, water consumption was steady, the reserve adequate for the planned stage. Kian reported that the wind was shifting slightly, signaling a likely change in the weather, perhaps a stronger push tomorrow, or perhaps simply colder air. From the north, they consulted their route, marked not on paper, but memorized, etched onto the minds of the lead mente. Next major waypoint was a buried city, a ruined ancient stone structure that provided a rare, reliable cistern fed by underground springs. It was still 2 full days' march if the pace held steady. 2 days across waterless terrain, relying solely on what they carried. Nasrullah nodded, silent in acceptance of the risk, a constant factor in this trade. He thought of the city they were heading toward, the vast bustling market where this cargo would be dispersed. The thought was remote, abstract, almost fictional. After the relentless reality of the desert, he watched the stars begin to emerge, the sky above the Gobi becoming a ceiling of pure, undiluted lighting, the absence of city lamps or moisture in the air. The stars were immense, sharp, cold diamonds scattered across the velvet black expanse. Again pointed out the pole star, the reliable guide, the fixed point around which the entire northern sky revolved. They never truly lost direction while that star remained visible. The history of the Silk Road was written in these stars, in the slow movement of ancient constellations, understood by generations of traders who traveled. Only by their light around the fire, the few men who were not on watch spoke softly in various dialects. A mixture of Chinese, Persian, Sogdianthi, Spoke of home, of wives, of children, of the small luxuries they hoped to buy with their wages, small comforts. Simple dreams, the human element of this enormous undertaking. They told slow, winding stories of past. Journeys of near misses with sandstorm, meetings with other caravans. Tales of strange sights seen in the deep desert. These stories were murmured. Gently, low voices, careful not to disturb the cloaked silence that encompassed them. The camp settled into a state of profound stillness. Fire reduced to glowing embers, a circle of red warmth fighting the rapidly increasing cold. The camels rested. Kneeling quietly, their large bodies mounds of shadow against the sand, occasionally chewing cud, a deep, resonant, grinding sound. Nasrullah pulled his thickest woolen cloak tight around him, the velvet of the fabric providing comforting warmth. He knew. This cold silence, this total immersion in the ancient landscape was necessary. Modern world with its noise and impatience seemed impossibly far away, a faint echo from a different time here. There was only the desert, the sky, the stars, and the slow breathing of the caravan. He closed his eyes, but did not sleep yet. He listened to the sounds of the night. The tiny rustle of a desert mouse, the low sigh of the wind passing over the dunes, the steady rhythmic breathing of the men around him. Was the sound of persistence, the sound of commerce achieved through endurance. The great journey continued in the darkness. Even as they rested, their trajectory across the earth was set there in movement ordained by demand and profit. He remained awake, watching the last of the embers fade until the desert cold forced him to seek the shelter of his blanket. He would sleep for perhaps 5 hours a deep, dreamless sleep that was more exhaustion than true rest, and then the light would return hushed. Amber would touch the eastern rim, and the guttural groan of the waking camels would announce the start of another identical slow day, another day of dust and heat, another day of unending forward motion, another of the etched path across the ancient world. The silence now was absolute, save for the sound of his own breathing, deep, slow, measured breathing, matching the pulse of the vast, sleeping desert. The stars wheeled slowly above the camp, indifferent to the small human drama unfolding below. They offered their cold, distant light, their ancient guide to the next horizon. Tomorrow they would rise and march toward the buried city too. Days of slow effort separated them from the next gulp of fresh spring water, 2 days and 40 kilometers of sand. Sun and silence, the thought settled calmly in his mind. A simple fact of existence. He felt the cold seep through the ground, but the warmth of the gathered men was reassuring. The caravan rested, a cloaked mass awaiting the light, the continuation, the journey onward, the slow beat of time, measured only by the changing position of the stars and the steady rocking gait of the camels, the rhythm of the earth. The quiet movement of ancient history across the wide expanse, just the silence and the stars, just the long wait until the amber returns. The cold deep seeped into the marrow of the bone. A chill born not of winter, but of centuries locked away. A slow enduring cold that swallowed the small amber light of the lantern. The air here was not stale. It was absent, hushed, and weighty, as if the oxygen itself had solidified into ancient velvet dust, settling upon the stone steps. Beneath the seeker's careful feet, each movement a monumental disturbance in the profound silence. The passage narrowed, pressing, closed the walls, ruffian basalt etched faintly with symbols. Long since forgotten, perhaps? Markers of a king's burial, perhaps only the idle carvings of miners who sought iron and instead found history. They descended slowly, measuring time not in minutes, but in the increasing pressure on the ears, a deep atmospheric shift, hinting at depths no longer measured by the surface world stone. Groaned slightly, a low rumble far beneath the foundation, a sound that might be the settling earth, or perhaps the sigh of the deep path awakening to the light, a single focused beam piercing the dark. The walls changed texture, the basalt giving way to a pale, creamy limestone marked by strange looping spirals, Celtic art perhaps, overlaid by later Roman mortar fragments, clinging stubbornly like shed skin of a former age. This space was a palimpsest of devotion and decay, each layer telling a silent story of conquest and forgetting of rituals. Whispered in the dark and secrets buried deep beneath the rolling English hills. Seeker paused, pressing a gloved hand against the wall, feeling the cold vibration. The silence was not empty, it was full of potential noise, the promise of echoes. That never quite materialized. Further down the passage broadened, dramatically opening into a vast circular chamber, unexpected in its scale, a hushed amphitheater of the subterranean realm. The ceiling was lost in shadow, perhaps 50 feet high. Dome of unseen rock weeping, slow metallic moisture that dripped with infinite slowness into a hidden pool far below where the sound was swallowed instantly. The center of the chamber, resting upon a highly polished dark granite, stood. The offering it was not gold or jewels, not the sunstone artifact itself, but something far older, far more resonant, a statue carved from a single block of dark obsidian, cloaked and hooded standing sentinel. The figure possessed no face, only the smooth curve of the hood suggesting endless vigilance, its hands clasped tightly around a single bowl of pure glowing amber. Amber was the chamber's only true light source, absorbing the lantern's weak beam and amplifying it, returning the glow with a diffused, honeyed warmth that made the shadows velvet soft. The seeker approached slowly, the polished granite floor reflecting the twin lights, the living flame and the ancient glow creating shimmering duplicates that stretched and danced like silent attendants. The air grew heavy with the scent of dried herbs and mineral salts. A faint perfume of preservation, a deliberate attempt to hold the breath of the past touching. The obsidian was an act of reverence and fear. The stone was impossibly cold, drawing the heat from the fingertips, suggesting a connection to an immense cold mass beneath the earth itself. Etched symbols on the granite platform or on the statue's base were different, unlike the passage markings. They were astronomical. Small stars, clustered constellations, perhaps the Ursa Major, the Great Bear. The celestial guides of ancient navigators. The seeker knelt, tracing the lines, feeling the slight abrasion of the carvings beneath the pad of the finger, each star a point. In a map of the heavens frozen into the stone floor, the amber bowl seemed to hum slightly, a low-frequency vibration. Almost beyond the range of human hearing, a gentle thrumming that was felt more in the chest cavity than in the ear within the amber. Itself suspended and motionless were tiny inclusions, frozen life, ancient organisms. Perfectly preserved relics of a time before recorded memory, before the dawn of stone architecture. As the seeker studied the positioning of the celestial markings, a pattern began to emerge, a careful correlation between the statue's shadow and the carved stars. The lantern light was too weak, too mutable. The key must be the true light, the sun or the moon at a very specific moment in the annual cycle. Yet something else here felt immediate, not cyclical. Cloaked statues stood precisely at the nexus of the chamber's geometric center, and its shadow, even from the small lantern, stretched out, pointing directly toward one of the chamber wall that appeared entirely seamless, smooth limestone. The seeker stood, following the shadow's long, slow stretch, a dark, accusatory finger pointing toward a depth, unexplored, reaching. The wall, the cold was intensified, a distinct drop in temperature, suggesting density absence, or hollow space beyond, running hands over the surface, searching for joins or edges. The limestone felt solid, immovable, impenetrable, yet the shadow insisted otherwise. Pressure, applied gentle but firm to the point where the shadow terminated. The stone remained stubbornly static, unyielding. A whisper, low and dry, crossed the chamber, perhaps the movement of disturbed dust, perhaps the stone protesting the intrusion. Then the seeker noticed a faint depression. Near the shadow's tip, a tiny etched symbol unlike any seen before, not Celtic, not Roman, not Saxon, but primordial, single curve, like a was barely visible, requiring the full focus of the lantern light held close to the rough surface. It was not a button or a lever, but a signature, a specific pressure point, perhaps. The seeker drew a deep, slow breath, the air tasting of earth and history, and pressed the fingertip gently but firmly into the serpentine curve. There was no sound of grinding stone, no catastrophic shift, only a soft, sighing expulsion of air from deep within the wall, followed by a near-silent retraction. A seam appeared in the smooth limestone wall, a hairline fracture that widened slowly, deliberately revealing a passage beyond. This new passage was narrower than the first, barely wide enough for one person to pass the opening, shrouded in a blackness so absolute it seemed to consume the lantern light rather than reflect it. The air issuing from this new void was different, colder, sharper, carrying the unmistakable metallic scent of copper and perhaps something else, something faintly acrid like ozone or sulfur. The mystery deepened. The first passage was a grand descent, an obvious path of ritual. This new opening felt clandestine, secret. Perhaps a final sanctuary or a protective trap. The seeker hesitated, looking back at the hushed chamber, the silent obsidian sentinel guarding the luminous amber. Bowl, a perfect tableau of stillness and ancient power. The commitment was made, the decision. Slow and irrevocable, the story lay through the black seam, the deeper unknown stepping. Through the opening, the lantern held high. The stone slid back into place behind the seeker with the same gentle sigh, leaving no trace of the entrance, only smooth. Seamless limestone. The new corridor was unlike the first walls, carved from a slick, almost wet shale that absorbed all light, rendering the space profoundly dark and disorienting. The floor was uneven, rough rubble that shifted beneath the feet, making forward movement cautious and painfully slow. The metallic smell grew stronger, the air feeling thinner, heavier, simultaneously a paradox of subterranean atmosphere then. The silence that had reigned supreme in the outer chamber fractured. A sound emerged. From the deep dark ahead, a sound that should not exist here, sealed miles beneath the world, was a soft rhythmic metallic tick, a steady, precise beat like a clock mechanism's working perfectly in the eternal tomb tick-tick. The sound was too measured, too modern to belong to the ancient stonework, too sharp to be a settling rock, too deliberate to be water dripping. It suggested presence intention machinery, operating in isolation for untold centuries. A mechanism preserved, performing some forgotten function. The seeker stopped lantern beam, oscillating slightly, trying to pierce the overwhelming darkness ahead, searching for the source of the persistent metallic heartbeat. Tick, tick. It was getting closer, or perhaps the corridor was simply amplifying the noise, leading directly to whatever secret device lay ahead. This was not the silence of the dead past. This was the sound of something currently running, something waiting. Beam of the lantern trembled, finding no reflective surface, only the hungry blackness, the metallic rhythm growing louder, more insistent. Seeker moved forward, slowly drawn by the impossible precision of the sound, the question of what ancient civilization or what forgotten craft possessed the ability to manufacture such endurance. The passage turned sharply, cutting off the faint residual light from the main chamber, plunging the seeker into a realm where the lantern was the only fragile bastion. Against the consuming dark tick-tick, the rhythm ceased, abruptly replaced by a single distinct sound, a low, powerful metallic click, followed by a slow, heavy grinding noise, like fast gears shifting into position. The air pressure immediately dropped, the metallic scent spiking sharply. The seeker stood motionless, heart beating faster than the ticking mechanism had ever dared to run, listening intently to the overwhelming silence that returned after the single grinding sound. Had the mechanism just ceased its long vigil, or had it just opened something infinitely larger far ahead in the absolute blackness where the grinding sound originated? A faint, almost imperceptible light appeared, not the warm amber of the past, but a cold, clinical blue light shimmering briefly, then stabilizing, a fixed alien eye staring back down. The long shale tunnel, the blue light did not flicker. It pulsed slowly, steadily, casting no helpful illumination, only defining the overwhelming scope of the void ahead. What waited at the source of that unnatural light and that precise metallic sound? Was the history of the world altered? Perhaps the very secret sought, yet infinitely more dangerous than the silent stones already encountered. The deep passage opened into a vast unseen space, filled only with the cold blue glow and the chilling possibility of something mechanical, something awake, something waiting for the next slow, deliberate turn. The unknown stretched out, infinitely cold blue, and hushed, inviting the next careful step into the echoing dark where the history was alive and counting every breath taken, the slow turning of the earth. Underneath the camel's padded footfall lay sound, muted, hushed, swallowed instantly by the fine ochre powder that constitutes this vast desert floor. We move before the true dawn, while air still holds the deep chill of the hours before midnight. This third stage of the journey demands cold starts. Long stretches between the wells, nothing but sand and sky and a unchanging line of the horizon. The caravan master, Nasir, wraps his face tighter against the unseen wind, the loose folds of his cloak settling around his shoulders like heavy velvet. He rides the led beast, a great male camel named Rimal, whose steps are known and trusted a metronome for the rest of the weary train. Rimal's breath plumes briefly in the cold air. A soft mist instantly dissolves a temporary ghost in the heavy darkness. The stars overhead are still sharp and countless, indifferent. Diamonds scattered across the impenetrable blackness. This is the great silence, the deep quiet that only the ancient heart of the trade. Root knows it is a silence, not an absence, but an immense presence, the presence of endless space and time. Ropes creak, a low, comforting counterpoint to the soft thudding of the feet leather, rubbing against wood, against wool, against stone carried in the saddlebags. Sound is dull, predictable, a measured reassurance that the world is still solid, still moving, still carrying us slowly eastward toward the Jade Mountains. First hints of light are merely a thinning of the blackness, not a color yet. Just a shift in the density of the air directly before us. The desert awakens subtly, unwilling to rush the transition. The temperature begins its steady climb from bitter cold toward the inevitable baking heat of the mid-morning sun. But for now, we exist in the liminal state, the cool, soothing pocket of time when travel is most efficient, most effortless. Drivers walk, mostly saving their strength for the long days. Their silhouettes are elongated, stretched thin, and distorted by the lingering shadows. Behind them, each man follows the heels of the man ahead, a chain of slow intention, their heads bowed. Slightly focusing only on the track, the familiar indentations in the dirt, left by the thousands of caravans that have passed this way for centuries. These tracks are deep grooves etched into the landscape themselves, ancient guides whispered into the stone. We are merely the latest travelers echoing the steps of those who came before us. Sand is not uniform here. It shifts from soft yielding powder that pulls at the ankles to hard-packed gray earth. Where old riverbeds once flowed, the camels know the difference, sensing the solidity beneath their wide protective pads. They communicate their effort through subtle shifts in their gait. The low rhythmic sighing sound they make when the work demands more of them. Listen closely to the persistent drag of the heavy load sacks of grain barrels, of dried fruit bolts, of raw silk carefully wrapped to protect them from the dust, the heat, the light. They represent the hopes and the demands of empires separated by thousands of slow, patient miles. Step Rhino takes moves the world's wealth imperceptibly closer to its new destination. The monotony isn't magic of the Silk Road journey. It is the hypnotic sameness that lulls the mind into a state of deep, restful peace. There's no decision to make, no path to choose, save the one immediately before us. Just the endless repetition of rising, walking, resting, rising, walking, resting. The sky is turning now slowly, slowly. The edges of the low dunes begin to define themselves, emerging from the obscurity. They are soft, rounded forms sculpted by the persistent, tireless breath of the desert wind. Ripple, each small crest is a tiny masterpiece of shifting erosion. The color has arrived, now not bright gold, but a pale muted apricot, a gentle wash across. The eastern quadrant illuminates the low cloud cover, revealing the deep cloudless blue stretching high above us when the light finally touches the ground. It is golden amber, transforming the drab gray sand into something warm, living, almost liquid. Dust motes suspended in the morning air catch the rays, becoming fleeting tiny stars around our heads. It is a slow, beautiful ritual enacted every single day, and yet it never fails to feel profound. Shadows shrink rapidly, receding quickly from long, distorted giants to small, compact shapes beneath the camels' bellies. The warmth begins to settle upon our skin, a welcome sensation after the harsh desert night. The air loses its crispness, becoming heavy, dense with the smell of dry earth. And animal sweat. We stop brief for the morning prayer and for the first drink of the day. Water is rationed, carefully measured out from the thick leather skin stored in the coolest of the loaded. Tastes of leather and minerals and the essential coolness of preservation, a precious luxury. Drivers speak little now, their morning greetings exchanged hours ago. When the movement first began, they focus on the simple task of preparing the camels for the coming heat, checking the girths, tightening the ropes, ensuring that the load ride's true A load balanced imperfectly can ruin a day's travel, injure an animal, destroy Precious cargo patience and meticulous care are the true currency of the caravan trade. Nasser signals the resumption of movement. Not with a shout, but with a quiet clap of his hands, a sound barely audible over the shifting sand. And we fall back into the rhythm, the steady, unwavering pace that defines the march. Sun is fully risen, now a brilliant, relentless disk beginning. Its slow, arduous ascent, it shines directly into our faces, demanding that we shield our eyes with the edges of our scarves. Heat intensifies steadily, a furnace being stoked. Slowly, but surely, hours pass, marked only by the shifting angle of the light and the slow disappearance of the water in the skins. The world becomes only the space. Immediately surrounding us, the space defined by the sound of our own movement. The far horizon dissolves into a shimmering heat haze, a mirage of water, and distant settlements that is only the desert mocking the weary eye. The sand reflects the light back up, magnifying the intensity of the sun. We are now cloaked fully in the heat, enduring the long, inevitable stretch of the day. The drivers pull their cloaks tighter, though not for warmth, but for protection from the burning rays. The fabric acts as a barrier, a thin layer of separation between the body and the overwhelming heat. They walk with their heads down, conserving every ounce of energy. Path seems endless, repeating itself, dune after dune, ridge after ridge. Yet, the men know that this repetition, this absolute dedication to the mundane task, is what keeps them safe. It is the boring, relentless focus on the immediate step that ensures arrival. The psychological toll of the desert is often greater than the physical. The mind begins to play tricks, searching for color, searching for difference, searching for water that is not there. One must deliberately quiet the mind to embrace the stillness, the unchanging nature of the scene, to find comfort in the sameness and the steady pulse of the camel's movement beneath the saddle. A slight breeze stirs, briefly carrying with it the scent of salt from a distant dreed-out Lake Bede, a relic of an age when this land was wetter, richer, more accommodating. That scent quickly vanishes, replaced by the dry, arid smell of pure dust. We pass a cairn of stones, a small monument left by a previous caravan, perhaps a marker, perhaps a small tribute to a traveler who did not complete the journey. It is a quiet reminder of the serious nature of this ancient undertaking. The simple stacked stones stand etched against the blue sky, sharp and defiant against the soft lines of the dunes. A small moment of stone stillness in the flowing river of sand. We do not stop, we pass it by silently acknowledging its presence. Caravan never pauses. Its momentum, once truly built, cannot be easily broken or restarted. The sun reaches its zenith directly overhead, eliminating almost all shadows. This is the hardest of the day, the time when the heat presses down, heavy and inescapable. Air itself seems to shimmer and vibrate with the intensity of the light. The camels carry us through this with their deep, inherent desert wisdom. They require little urging, trusting the driver and the steady pace. Their massive feet lift and replace themselves in the hot sand with practiced slow precision. We pass through a region of scattered small rocks, obsidian, gray basalt, volcanic remnants from a time long past. The change in texture underfoot creates a momentary difference in the sound. A slight crunching metallic sound, replacing the soft thud of the deep sand. This small variation is noticed, welcomed briefly, then lost as we return to the soft dust. The afternoon stretches out ahead of us, a vast, shimmering, empty canvas of endurance. The goal now is simply to maintain the pace, to avoid slowing down, to conserve the remaining water. The conversation has ceased. Entirely only the rhythmic sounds of the journey remain our constant companions. The deep guttural murmur of the rhymal, the lead camel, the soft whisper of the dross, the ropes, the relentless scrape of leather on cloth. These sounds become the measure of our lives, the soundtrack of our sleep story. Our traveling not just through space, but through time, carried by the ancient flow of commerce and quiet resolve. Day will slowly turn, the light will soften, the shadows will lengthen once more, and the blessed cold of the desert night will return. But until then, there is only the slow, unwavering movement toward the east, mile after mile after mile. The sun was already climbing a harsh, pale disk above the eastern ridge of dunes, and the Sand felt cool, still beneath the great splayed feet of the Bactrian beast, but that coolness was already dissolving, already retreating from the inevitable slow burn of the desert day, and the caravan moved onward without pause, without hesitation. Simply following the invisible thread of the ancient path, the bells began their work, a ceaseless, gentle chiming. A velvet drone that settled into the brain, easing the edges of thought, the little brass bells, fastened to the harnesses of the lead. Camels sounded a measured metallic rhythm, a slow tick of time that was neither fast nor slow, simply constant, simply there each. Step was one step closer, and yet felt like 1,000 steps further away from. Anything recognizable or stationary? The world here was liquid sand and sky poured out in shades of beige and blue, and the journey was measured not in miles, but in the slow shift of the light across the humps of the sleeping camels. I had left the last reliable water source days ago, days that stretched into a quiet blur of heat and walking, and now we entered the true heart of the emptiness, the stretch where the guides relied purely on memory and the faint, etched lines of ancient. Stone markers half buried by centuries of wind and drift, the air was utterly dry, so dry it seemed to pull the moisture from the very bones of the travelers, and the smell was dust and dried leather and the faint sweet scent of the compressed raw. Silk piled high on the backs of the stronger dromedaries. Slowly, the morning ascended into the relentless midday. Sky deepened from pale pearl to a blinding, uninflected azure, a color so vast it felt solid, pressing down upon the travelers. And the shadows that had stretched long and comforting in the early hours shrank back, hiding close beneath the bellies of the animals, offering no respite at all. Heat was not merely hot, it was silent heat and oppressive stillness that deadened. Sound and movement. The only noise was the shuffle of hooves and the low guttural complaints of the camels creatures built for this purgatory creatures, designed by time itself to endure the unimaginable lack of water and shade. The men walked mostly, in silence, saving their breath for the long afternoon. The merchant Nizrullah rode near. The front cloaked heavily despite the temperature, his eyes narrowed. Against the brilliant glare beneath the thick protective cloth of his headdress, he was a figure carved from desert stone, patient, unyielding, focused entirely on the small fortune strapped to the backs of his herd, that slow-moving fortune of finished goods and sought-after materials. Think of the weight of the silk bales, 300. Bales, perhaps 600, the best quality spun from Chinese worm, soft and cool, even under the baking sun, wrapped in protective oilcloths and tightly bound with hemp rope. Each bale represented months of labor, thousands of miles of travel, and a promise of immense wealth at the far western markets. The movement of the caravan became a study in slow physics, a continuous flowing entity inching across the face of the earth. The camels moved at perhaps 2.5 miles an hour, or slightly less, sometimes slightly more, depending on the subtle resistance of the sand. 2.5 miles an hour for 10 hours a day, 25 miles a day on a very good day, and then the long, slow setting up of a night camp, the minimal meal. The preparation for the inevitable repetition of the dawn. This repetition was the very nature of the road. It was the lullaby of the desert traveler one. Foot after the other, the steady rocking gait of the tall creatures, the rhythmic creak of the leather bindings against the wooden saddles, a sound both comforting and maddening in its persistence. Look closely at the sand, not just yellow sand or brown sand, but a complex crystalline structure reflecting the intense light. The dust was so fine. It rose in a constant low haze around the hooves, filtering the light near the ground, giving the world an amber hue near the horizon. A softness that belied the harsh reality of the distance. The vastness here defied comprehension. Imagine looking out in every direction and seeing only the slow curve of the earth meeting the bowl of the sky. No trees, no rivers, no buildings, nothing to mark human time or scale, merely the ancient stone of the planet exposed to the elements. The only things that spoke of man were the caravan itself, the thin line of beasts and men, and the occasional shard of pottery or bone bleached white by sun marking or another journey. Perhaps centuries ago had passed or perished. The sun reached its zenith, a merciless burning point directly overhead, and the shadows disappeared entirely. The heat pressed in a physical weight on the head and shoulders. This was the time of the deep hush when the soundscape reduced even further. The bells sounded, muffled the breathing. The animals became shallow. The men focused entirely on the mechanical act of placing one foot in front of the other, conserving energy. Minimizing speech, Nasrullah raised a hand, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, and the lead camels slowed their pace even further, recognizing the signal of maximum conservation. They would walk straight through this heat until the sun began its long, slow descent into the western void. That was the only way to cover the needed distance to make the next predetermined hidden wellspring. The knowledge of these wellsprings was the true wealth of the journey, more valuable than any silk or spice. These were not grand oases with palm trees and bustling markets. These were often simple stone-lined holes, dug deep into the earth, guarded by rough cairns markers etched by generations of guides. The marker was missed if the well was dry, or if a rogue dune had swallowed the entrance, the journey ended. Abruptly in failure and death, the weight of this knowledge lay heavy on the shoulders of the chief guide. A man named Tarek, whose eyes were perpetually narrowed, etched with the lines of relentless sunlight, and whose quiet authority when unquestioned direct did not speak of the distance he spoke, only of the next few hours, of the condition of the lead beasts, of the color of the dust on the horizon. Tiny immediate facts that kept the mind tethered to the present moment, preventing the overwhelming dread of the infinite horizon. They were carrying more than silk. They were carrying dried fruits, hardened cheeses, dried meat for sustenance, and they were carrying cinnamon and ginger, nutmeg and cloves heavy in the air whenever a protective covering shifted slightly. Imagine the scent of the cloves. A powerful warmth, a sweetness against the dry, sterile air, a tiny promise of luxury waiting at the end of this exhausting path, and underneath that the smell of musk, deer glands, highly sought after, highly prized for perfumers in Antioch and Rome. Packed in small sealed wooden boxes, each box worth the equivalent of a small house back in the Chinese capital. This wealth moved silently, slowly, hypnotically across the desert floor. The passage of time became fluid, meaningless. 5 hours felt like 50 minutes, and 50 minutes felt like 5 hours, depending on the momentary comfort or discomfort, the temporary shade of a high camel hump. The flicker of a distant mirages were common, now shimmering lakes of blue water reflecting non-existent palm trees, tantalizing, cruel illusions that the seasoned travelers ignored entirely, but that the newer, younger guards sometimes stared at, hoping against their own better judgment that this time it might be real. It was never real. Only the heat, only the light, only the sand. The afternoon wore on a long, slow stretch of endurance. The sun finally began its definite angle downward away from the apex, and the shadows began their slow, magnificent return, stretching first as blue wisps beneath the camels and then lengthening dramatically into distorted shapes of men and beasts, giants walking the endless plain. This was the beginning of the blessed shift when the heat began to withdraw its suffocating embrace, when the muscles that had been tight with fatigue started to relax slightly, and the promise of a night began to draw the caravan onward. Color of the world changed rapidly, moving from that blinding white and beige to deep amber and then a fiery orange. The sand dunes, previously featureless, now showed every ripple and curve, every small flaw etched into the surface by the wind, each ridge highlighted by the descending light. A photographer's perfect moment. Utterly beautiful, utterly desolate. Nasrullah pulled his cloak tighter, preparing for the rapid temperature drop that always followed the sunset. In the desert, the heat does not merely fade. It collapses once the sun dips below the horizon. The stored warmth of the day radiates quickly away into the cold vacuum of the upper atmosphere, and within an hour the temperature can drop by 50 degrees or more. It is a world of extremes, of burning day and freezing night, and the traveler must be ready to accommodate both with simple layers of woven wool and heavy hide. Stark, the guide, signaled, and the pace increased marginally, sensing the end of the day's forced march. They aimed for a specific low ridge, a place that offered some small windbreak, a place where the sand was slightly firmer. For setting up the small leather tents, the last sliver of the sun vanished. The sky exploded into a brief but glorious display of pinks, oranges, and deep violet hues that bled into the darkening blue. Above, the final stretch was walked in the soft atmospheric gloom, the light fading quickly until the world was reduced to shapes, silhouettes against the residual light of the western sky. Caravan finally stopped, not with a sudden halt, but a slow deceleration as settling down the camels knelt, with their usual noisy groans, folding their long legs beneath them, releasing deep sighing breaths of relief, the sound of massive, tired bodies finding rest. First tasks were always the same: immediate and efficient in loading the cargo must be done carefully, slowly, ensuring that the precious silk bales did not touch the cold, dampening ground. Protective mats were laid out, the bales stacked tightly away from the elements then. The water rationing carefully measured out for the men. A slightly more generous but still guarded amount for the animals. The water was drawn from the leather bags, heavy and sloshing, a precious sound, a sound of life itself. Small fires were lit, not for great heat, but for cooking the meager evening meal. And for psychological comfort, the wood was scrub brush collected in small bundles. Near the last water source, dry, brittle wood that burned quickly, giving off a sharp scent. Off smoke that mingled with the desert air. Around the small, flickering flames, the men finally allowed themselves to speak low voices, sharing quiet observations about the day's travel or memories of places far away, places that had cool running streams and tall green trees. The food was simple dried lentils, boiled rice, hard cakes of bread, softened slightly with broth, and always the strong bitter tea. Boiled quickly over the fire, a necessary ritual of warmth and rehydration. Nasrullah sat slightly apart, observing the efficient routine of his men, his mind already calculating the distance remaining, the possible threat of bandits near the mountain passes. The political stability of the destination cities. He did not rush the evening. He allowed the slow, quiet peace of the desert. Night to settle into his bones when the eating was done, when the small talk subsided. The fires were reduced to glowing embers, and the true magic of the desert night began. The desert sky without the interference of any city lights or atmosphere. Pollution is the most perfect velvet black dome imaginable. Stars emerged one by one, then thousands upon thousands, a blinding display of celestial light that felt close enough to touch Tarek. The guide moved quietly away from the campfires. Dim glow to stand alone looking up for. The desert traveler, the stars are the map, the compass, the clock, and the calendar. Was reading the great curve of the heavens, recognizing the familiar patterns, the ancient constellations named by the shepherds. And the wanderers millennia ago, he was checking their position, confirming the caravan's location, confirming the bearing for the morning's start, ensuring that the path remained true and straight across the unseen miles. The pole star sat patiently, high and steady, a beacon of absolute north, and Tarek felt the comfort of that constancy. Knowledge that even when everything on the ground was moving, shifting sand and endless dunes, the sky remained fixed, predictable, trustworthy. Air grew bitterly cold, now the temperature plummeting further. The men retreated into their heavy felt cloaks, pulling the thick fabric close, finding warmth near the embers or nestled close to the warm bulk of the resting camels, their thick hides radiating. The last of the day's heat sleep came quickly and deeply born of utter exhaustion. The soundscape of the night was hushed, reduced to the low murmur of the desert. Wind sifting across the sand, the faint crackle of the shrinking fire, and the steady, heavy breathing of the massive sleeping camels. A single guard remained awake, cloaked and silent, his eyes scanning the horizon, but there was rarely movement at night, only the vast, still solitude. The desert sleeps, and we sleep with it, becoming for a few hours merely of the immense quiet emptiness under the silent authority of the celestial map beneath the diamond spray of the ancient stars. The caravan rested, restoring the strength needed for the inevitable heat and the unrelenting distance that awaited them when the first pale light broke over the eastern dunes once more. It was a sleep of profound physical rest, but also a sleep steeped in the awareness of vulnerability of being a tiny speck of humanity and cargo surrounded by indifferent nature thousands of miles from any form of easy succor. The sand was cold against the sleeping mats. The silence was immense, and yet within that silence the rhythm of the journey persisted. The silent drumbeat of the camel bells waiting to resume their hypnotic song. At dawn we wait for the slow turning of the earth to bring the relentless heat, and we wait for the long hours of walking that will define the next phase of this slow, historical passage across the spine of the ancient world. Desert held us gently in its cold cradle, preparing us for the next stretch. The next measure of endurance until the distant promise of stone cities and running water might finally become real. But for now, there was only the cold of stars and a slow, deep breath of the sleeping desert caravan, a single line of velvet shadows resting under the watchful eyes of ancient night, a journey continuing even in stillness until the sun returns and pulls us forward once more. The deep, cold darkness. The silk lay compressed and quiet, carrying the secrets of the east westward, waiting patiently for the waking light to demand movement once more. Dust hangs suspended in the thick, hushed air, a million sleeping motes catching the low, weak amber. Glow that struggles through the hidden aperture we found it is an older light than sun or moon, a light born of deep, deep earth. Perhaps it is phosphorescence, perhaps it is something else entirely, something cloaked in the silence of ages, the floor. Beneath our worn boots is not rough rock. It is polished obsidian, cold and smooth. Like water frozen mid-flow, it holds the weak light, refusing to give it back, reflecting only the long stretching shadow that is us alone in this deep subterranean vault. This is not a chamber of burial. This is a chamber awaiting a place where time itself has slowed to a velvet crawl. The air here is dry, yet heavy. It tastes of pulverized quartz and the memory of fire, a fire that burned thousands of years. Before history began, we moved slowly, deliberately, our breaths shallow against the immense quiet that presses down upon the temples. We are dwarfed by the sheer geometry of this space. The walls rise up impossibly tall, disappearing into an unbroken curve above where the ceiling should be, but where there's only deeper shadow, a darkness that seems sentient. The entire space is hexagonal, perfectly aligned. Each corner sharp enough to cut through thought. The stone is etched, not carved with symbols that defy recognition. They are calculations, diagrams of celestial mechanics, far beyond our understanding. Of that ancient world, they speak of orbits of conjunctions of stars that have long since been swallowed by the void. Trace the lines with careful fingertips. The stone cool almost painfully, so against the skin each groove holds the memory of the tool that made it, the patient, persistent work of priests or astronomers who understood secrets we have lost. The scripts are vertical columns, dense and beautiful like solidified rain. The center of the hexagon rests a massive stone basin. It is hewn from a single block of deep green jade, an impossibly heavy object, and within it rests a liquid so dark it seems to absorb all available light. It is not water. It is too viscous, too still, too silent. Perhaps it is oil, perhaps it is simply concentrated shadow. We approach the basin slowly, the silence amplifying the faint scrape of leather on stone. We lean over the edge and stare into the dark mirror, and it reflects nothing but the truth of the cavern around us, distorted and deep. The only thing missing is our own reflection. It is as if this dark liquid only shows what is permanently fixed in the stone, not what is temporary and fleeting like human life. The walls near the basin are covered in smaller, detailed etchings, miniature constellations mapped out with astonishing precision. These are not the stars we know. They are slightly shifted, slightly altered, a universe running on a different time, a different axis, perhaps. We realize that this place is a clock, a monumental chronometer designed to measure not years, but epochs. The alignments on the walls correspond to cycles of thousands of years, designed to note the moment when certain cosmic conditions repeat themselves, a moment they must have been waiting for. One particular set of etched lines draws the eye. They are unlike the others. They are not mathematical, but narrative. They depict figures cloaked and tall, holding globes of light, standing before a great dark sea. Below them are smaller figures, kneeling, their faces tilted upward in supplication or awe. Story etched in the stone tells of a departure, not an ending. It speaks of the founders of this ancient place, gathering their knowledge, their light, and sailing away upon the darkness, leaving behind this chamber, this testament to their eventual return. See symbols for a great silence, a long sleep, and then the symbol of the alignment. The precise moment the cosmos would turn back upon itself, completing the immense cycle that governs their voyage and their potential reappearance. The cold begins to seep into the bones, a chill that is more than just the temperature of the deep. Earth, it is the cold of profound age, the cold of abandonment, anticipation. We realize that the people who built this chamber did not die here. They simply left their seats still waiting their final purpose unfulfilled. We move along the perimeter, while searching for any other indication of direction, any hint of where they went or why they chose this specific subterranean location for their cosmic stopwatch. The wall opposite the entrance is seamless, smooth black obsidian, utterly devoid of joints or markings, yet as we stand before it, concentrating on the immense silent weight of the stone, we feel a subtle vibration, a hum so low it registers more in the chest cavity than in the ear. It is the sound of deep energy contained. The sound of millennia pressing against the barrier, a sound that suggests the stone is not merely a wall, but a door, a seal, waiting for the precise cosmic key to turn it. We run hands over the surface, searching for a latch, a fissure, a seam. But there is nothing, only the cold, hard perfection of the ancient stone. But the humming persists, growing infinitesimally stronger, a long, slow note held by the earth itself. We look back at the jade basin. The dark liquid within is no longer perfectly still. A minute ripple disturbs the surface, radiating outward from the exact center of the pool. It is slow, deliberate, like the movement of heavy oil. The ripples catch the low amber light, fracturing the reflections of the etched walls. The geometric patterns on the floor seem to shift almost imperceptibly. The whole space is subtly moving, like the deck of a massive silent ship turning slowly on an immense dark ocean. We return to the central basin, leaning closer to observe the strange rippling in the black liquid, and we notice something we missed before. Suspended just beneath the surface, floating in the heavy, viscous dark, is something small, something metallic, something reflecting a sudden brief flash of light. It is not a piece of the architecture, it is an artifact of the people who left it. It is a disc no bigger than a coin, made of some unfamiliar alloy that holds a sheen like polished mercury, and as the ripples pass over it, the disc seems to vibrate in sympathy with the deep humming in the wall. We reach into the cold, dense liquid. The temperature is shocking, like plunging the hand into liquid nitrogen. The cold burns instantly, but we retrieve the object, bringing it up, dripping the dark fluid running off its surface. The disc is heavy, impossibly dense for its size, and perfectly circular. Etched upon its surface is a symbol repeated 3 times around the circumference. A stylized eye weeping a single long tear that ends in a spiral as we hold this mercury-like disc. The humming sound intensifies, now undeniably coming from the deep obsidian wall, and simultaneously, the amber glow in the chamber begins to dim slowly, agonizingly. The light recedes back toward the hidden aperture, leaving the chamber in deepening profound shadow. The stone basin too reacts to the object held in our hand. The dark liquid begins to sink, retreating into a drain or a reservoir at the base of the jade, leaving the basin empty and revealing beneath where the liquid lay hidden in the jade bottom a small recess, a perfect indentation, the exact size and shape of the disc we now hold. A silent question hangs in the cold air. Should we place the disc in the recess? The humming is a clear invitation, a demand. The closing light is a definite urgency, a gentle push toward the unknown. Look toward the immense smooth obsidian wall where the deep sound emanates. The wall where we suspect the true passage lies concealed, and then we look down at the disc, glowing dully in our palm, and the indentation waiting for its return. The air thickens once more, the velvet silence broken only by the deep resonant thrumming of the wall. The cold now wraps around us like a shroud, and as the final amber light vanishes, leaving only the reflected gleam of the mercury disc, the chamber is utterly dark, but in that darkness, we realize the geometry of the chamber has shifted. The airflow has changed, the subtle smell of quartz and fire replaced by the sharp scent of ozone and the deep, metallic tang of salt and sea, a scent that should not exist thousands of feet beneath the mountain. The silence returns, but it is a new kind of silence. A predatory waiting stillness that means something has moved, something has opened, something ancient is finally responding to the cosmic alignment. The wall hums one last time. A low, satisfying click echoing softly across the dark, unseen obsidian surface, and we know the door is not merely open, it is waiting in the vast. See that the etched people sailed upon the darkness they journeyed into is now breathing its cool, salty breath toward us in absolute dark. A deep drifting mystery beckons us forward to the endless ocean beyond the stone. The slow grind of the fourth month settled deep into the bones, a steady rhythmic sway that had become the only reality, the only measurement of time. Outside, the soft dust and the hushed breath of the wind. Caravan moved, always moving, a great serpentine chain across. The ochre plains of the desert floor where the sand was impossibly fine. Almost like flour, almost like velvet, under the heavy pads of the dromedaries. The lead camel bell chimed a dull bronze note, muted by the immensity of the silence surrounding. It a constant low drone, a heartbeat for the 100 weary souls cloaked and shaded. Against the endless, relentless sonnet was the hour of the long, shadow stretching out, lean and spectral behind the beast before the deep amber of the evening would stain the sky dust motes, danced in the shafts of light that pierced the canvas canopy above the lead rider. Small universes spiraling and falling, settling. Back onto the thick woolen robes, onto the etched silver of the stirrups, onto the tightly bound bales of silk and spice. The heat was not a sudden striking heat, but an ancient, oppressive presence that had seeped into the very air, turning oxygen thick and dry and tasting of stone. And distant smoke day after day, the same vista unfolded. An ocean of rolling dunes that seemed identical, yet were never truly identical, each crest a subtle variation, each valley a minor depression, holding the memories of wind and flood long gone. Merchants rode silent, now their initial chatter, their nervous counting their grand ambitions, had been swallowed by the sheer scale of the desert. Ambition was heavy and tiresome here. Only endurance was light, only the simple act of breathing in and out, the gentle jostle of the saddle. The focus on the camel's steady gait mattered. They traveled toward the great stone. Mountains, far beyond the horizon, mountains that held secrets and passes and promises of distant cities. But those mountains remained phantoms, heat, shimmer illusions rising. Falling with the light, the journey itself had become the destination, a long, slow meditation on patience. The man riding near the middle of the line. A trader named Kalin adjusted the heavy fold of his turban, his eyes squinting against the pervasive glare. He had memorized the texture of the camel's flank beneath him. The coarse hair, the smell of sweat and leather and old dried fodder, the steady squeak of the rope harness against the wood frame. It was a language of the journey itself, a dialect. Spoken by the moving earth and the burdened beasts, he thought of the load carried so carefully beneath him. Wrapped in protective layers of oilcloth and thick wool bales of silk spun from threads, finer than spiderwebs, lay as air yet heavy with value, and the precious cargo of crushed pigment, lapis, stone blue beyond imagining, mined from the high places destined for palaces and temples thousands of miles away. This ancient blue, this velvet powder was the reason for the suffering, the reason for the slow, deliberate pace, the absolute necessity of safety, eh? Hush fell over the wine when the sun dipped lower, still bathing the sand in that deep amber glow, painting the etched faces of the riders with gold. The sounds became magnified. The scrape of a shoe against the shifting ground, the long sighs of the camels easing their necks, the subtle rustle of dried fodder and a feedback. Drivers walked beside their beasts, their feet dragging slightly in the sand, their movements practiced. Economical, perfect in their slowness, they knew the desert, intimately knew how to conserve every drop of water, every ounce of energy, every syllable of speech there. Songs, too, had dwindled to simple, low chants, repetitive, soothing, almost indistinguishable. From the wind itself, one low note, then another, then a third, a cycle of sound designed not for entertainment, but for hypnosis, for the slowing down of the mind, allowing the body to simply exist. And Kalin remembered the hurried pace of the cities, the noise, the frantic demands, the clash of copper coins and the sharp cries of the hawkers. All that existed now only as a faint, confusing dream, like the echo of a forgotten life. Here, there was only the immense, indifferent sky and the ground. Slipping away beneath the endless shuffle of hooves, he watched the sand sift down from the edges of the load, falling like tiny hourglass grains, marking time in milliseconds. A constant shower of fine grit, the desert breathed a slow, massive breath, raising the temperature subtly, lowering it subtly, always in motion, always waiting. Air cooled imperceptibly the moment of transition from fierce day to frigid night. Beginning its long, slow approach, they would make camp soon. The routines of the Evening a comfort in their rigid predictability, unloading the heavy bales, laying out the thick ancient sleeping mats, the careful rationing of the water boiled over the tiny fire made from collected. Desert scrub, the fire would be small protected, hush speaking only in quiet snaps and whispers against the vast silence. Camels would kneel with groans of relief, their immense bodies sinking into the soft sand, their eyes half closed, contemplating the emptiness guard. Duty would be set too. Men awake at all times, watching the dark where shadows cloaked everything, and the faint silver light of the moon would soon begin to etch the shapes of the Duniscalen. Thought of the stars, they were magnificent out here, unfiltered by city lights or moisture hanging heavy and velvet black above them. He would watch them later before sleep, the constellations that guided the ancients, the same cold, silent points of light that had watched the passage of 10,000 caravans. Just like theirs, they were the true map, the slow ticking clock of the celestial world, comforting in their terrible distance and permanence. He reached inside his cloak and touched a small amulet, a piece of carved stone worn from the day's heat, simple, unadorned protection against the jinn of the deep desert, the mischievous spirits that love to mislead travelers in their sleep. It was a small ritual, but ritual was sanity here. Repetition was the key to unlocking the long, slow door of survival. Line halted without a signal, a trained, instantaneous stillness that ripples back through the entire Chingai. Collective sigh of relief passed through the riders. No words needed, simply the cessation of movement. The lead driver, a man of incredible taciturnity, raised a hand indicating the spot where they would spend the night, a slight rise affording some protection from the night wind. The work of setting up was slow, precise, methodical. The unloading was done with reverence for the precious cargo, each bale handled as if it contained brittle glass rather than resilient silk. The smells intensified now that they were stationary. The powerful odor of dried camel swept the sharp tang off dried goat cheese. The sweet, subtle perfume of stored cinnamon and rare woods, mixed with the pervasive smell of Duskelen, walked the perimeter, stretching his legs. Noticing the quality of the sand here, coarser, heavier, speckled with tiny flecks of mica that caught the last dying light of the sun, glittering briefly, then fading to dull stone. He watched his fellow travelers, their movements reflecting the slow exhaustion of months. No rushing, no sudden energy, only the deep reservoir of practiced slowness. A young apprentice struggled with a heavy water skin, dragging it slowly toward the cooking fire. Seasoned guard sharpened his short desert blade. The rasp of the stone against the metal, a brief, harsh sound quickly absorbed by the desert air, the sky above. The western ridge began its final transformation into a fiery spectacle of deep reds and purples, a vast transient piece of art that lasted mere minutes before plunging into the blue-black velvet of night dinner. With simple dried figs, preserved mutton, hard bread soaked in warm tea. The quiet conversation around the fire was soft, murmuring stories, traded about past journeys, about mythical oases, about the cost of pepper and Byzantium. They spoke slowly, the words drawn out, hushed, as if afraid to wake. Some sleeping giant beneath the Duniscalen finished his meal, washing the gritty residue down with the precious sweet tea. He leaned back against a stack of empty water skins, feeling the coolness of the desert night already settling into his cloak. The stars were indeed beginning their silent ascent, pinpricks of icy light against the heavy blackness. True quiet of the desert began now, a quiet that was not the absence of sound, but the lowering of all sound into a singular, profound hum of frequency. Only the desert knew it was the sound of distance, of vastness, of things that had not changed for millennia. He closed his eyes, letting the slow, continuous rhythmic hum of the desert carry him away from the rough wool of his cloak and the hard ground. Beneath him, he felt the days, the weeks, the months of travel merging into a single, slow, endless flow, a river of sand in time tomorrow. They would rise before the dawn, the bells would chime, the camels would groan, and they would resume their steady, unwavering shuffle toward the stone mountains and the distant horizon. The sleep they sought now was the sleep of a traveler deep, heavy, restorative, preparing the body not for action, but for the continuation of slowness, the feeling of the wind, shifting slightly, carrying the faintest scent of salt, perhaps from some distant ancient sea. long dried, or perhaps simply the memory of moisture carried on the air currents that skimmed the earth. He listened to the rhythmic chewing of the camels, processing their evening meal, a steady grinding sound, like small millstones turning slowly, 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 was the core of the journey, the ultimate boredom, the necessary repetition. The unwavering focus on the now, the next step, the next slow. Movement it was the secret history of trade, not the tales of sudden fortune, but the months of relentless monotony under the wide, ancient sky. The journey was etched into their skin, into their memory, into the very fibers of the silk they carried. A history written in the patient, steady rhythm of the desert caravan, a slow, deep breath taken and held across the empty earth. The sand was a hushed thing shifting beneath the soft pads off the tired camel's feet, a slow, relentless grinding that marked the passage of the hours, surely than any timepieces he had carried eastward from. The furthest fringes of the west, the air held the memory of the cold, but the sun was rising now, a vast orange disk, climbing the rim of the eternal plain spilling liquid. Amber across the dunes, the shadows stretched long and thin like dark ghosts, walking beside the caravan each. Man cloaked against the quickening heat, each beast bearing its slow, precious burden. We moved at the pace of breathing, the natural rhythm of the desert, no need for speed, no tolerance for haste. The journey was the destination itself, a ribbon of slow, deliberate motion unfurling across centuries of stone and grit. The lead camel, a grizzled veteran named Barud, sat, the tempo his head held high, his eyes half closed as if sleeping while walking in endless meditation on the road. Behind him followed the Lina powerful animals laden with bales of raw, silk tightly wrapped in protective hide, and bales of jade carved smooth and fragrant. Packages of spice clove and cinnamon and pepper, the invisible wealth of the world, moving quietly across the middle. Earth, the guides, the seasoned Sogdian. Venwa's language was the language of trade, walked with a silent competence, their movements economical. And dustless, they spoke little, only the necessary commands, a low guttural click for the camels, a soft warning call, if the path narrowed. Their eyes were etched with the linus off 1,000 sunrises, 1,000 dusks. They knew the desert, intimate Telius. A lover knows the quiet pattern of sleep, the slow, steady pull of the leather harness. Creak of the wooden frames, muffled, soft thud of the pack supplies. These were the sounds of the journey, a symphony of slow motion designed to soothe the anxious. Heart and lull the hurried mind. We had crossed the broken country, jagged foothills where the stone was harsh and the water tasted metallic and cold now. We were deep in the sand country, where the horizons were endless and the landscape offered no distractionally slow, hypnotic repetition, dune after slow dune. The early morning air smelled of dry earth and the peculiar sweet scent of camel hide warmed by the returning light. It was a clean smell, a pure smell, scent of survival distilled. The light grew brighter, harsher, pulling the deep blue from the sky, leaving it a pale, bleached expansia. Dome of indifferent perfection around the 10th hour of the March one. The sun rode high and merciless, and the shadows had shrunk to puddles sterically. Beneath the camel's belize called the first slow halt. Routine was ancient, immutably practiced dance of economy. Camels knelt with a great sighing groan, their legs folding carefully beneath them, a vast, slow, mechanical calypso releasing their weighty obligations. We unhooked the water skins, first checking the seals, the precious fluid measured. Not in cups, but in breaths, a small ration for each monosip that was less refreshment and more promise of the next ciphers later when the long day eased. The silk bales remained untouched, proctored from the direct fury of the heat beat layers of thick, dark wool. The secret of the silk was its vulnerability, its need for shade and moisture control. The fine spun threads whispered of cool, distant rivers of patient hands weaving in shadowed rooms worlds. Away from this blinding heat, the merchants themselves, men of substance had invested fortunes in this venture, say, in the thin shade of the piled goods, their robes pulled tight around their heads. They did not speak of the market, they did not discuss potential prices. Thoughts were for the city walls. Here in the silence of the immense desert, the only negotiation was with time itself. They watched the dust devil's mole dancing spirals of fine golden sand that sometimes appeared far off, twisting and whirling brief lab bore The heat consumed them, and then they vanished into the glare. Everything in the desert was temporary except the desert itself. The heat pressed down a thick, heavy blanket of oppression. It filled the ears and the throat. It made the air shimmer above the ground, creating impossible lakes of blue water mirages that tested the mind's resolve. We knew they were illusions, but the eye still yearned for the scythe promise of cool relief. We rested perhaps 3 slow hours, time marked by the sun's movement from one ridge of the camel hump to the other 3. Hours of motionless quiet silence, broken only by the dry chewing off the camel's kuda, slow rhythmic grinding sound that was profoundly peaceful.